The café where freedom was born. Picture a small café in the heart of Paris. The year is 1943. Outside, the city trembles under occupation, its streets patrolled by soldiers whose boots echo against cobblestone. Inside, the air hangs thick with cigarette smoke and the murmur of hushed conversations. At a corner table, beneath a dim lamp that casts long shadows across worn wood, sits a man with thick glasses and a cigarette perpetually dangling from his lips. His pen moves across paper with an intensity that suggests he is not merely writing words, but excavating something buried deep within the human condition itself. This is Jean-Paul Sartre, and in this moment, in this occupied city where freedom seems most absent, he is composing one of the most radical declarations of human liberty ever conceived. The contradiction is almost unbearable. How does one write about freedom when tanks roll through the streets outside? How does one speak of choice when every choice seems dictated by forces beyond control? Yet perhaps it is precisely here, in this crucible of constraint, that the true nature of freedom reveals itself most clearly. Sartre understood something that most of us spend our lives avoiding. He saw that we are not born with a predetermined nature, not delivered into this world with an instruction manual or a divine blueprint. We are thrown into existence first, raw and undefined, and only afterward do we create what we become. This idea would become the cornerstone of his philosophy, a simple phrase that carries the weight of cosmic responsibility. Existence precedes essence. Think about a paper knife for a moment. Before it exists, someone imagines it. An artisan conceives its purpose, its shape, the angle of its blade. The essence of the paper knife exists before the object itself comes into being. It is created to fulfill a function that was determined before the first piece of metal was ever shaped. This is how we typically think about creation, about purpose. First comes the idea, the design, the intention, then comes the thing itself. But what if human beings are nothing like paper knives? What if we arrive in this world without any preconceived purpose, without any cosmic artisan who determined what we should be before we took our first breath? This is the unsettling proposition at the heart of Sartrean existentialism. We exist first, and only through our actions, our choices, our commitments do we create our essence. We are not following a script written before we were born. We are writing the script as we live. In that Parisian café, surrounded by the evidence of human cruelty and the machinery of oppression, Sartre refused the consolations that most philosophies offer. He would not say that we are victims of circumstance, shaped entirely by our environment and upbringing. He would not claim that we possess an eternal soul with a predetermined destiny. He would not argue that our genes or our social class or our historical moment absolves us of responsibility for who we become. Instead, he made a claim far more terrifying and far more liberating. We are absolutely free, and this freedom is both our greatest burden and our most fundamental characteristic. Consider the weight of this for a moment. If there is no human nature that defines what we must be, then every moment presents us with the necessity of choosing who we are. The coward is not born a coward. The hero is not born a hero. These are not fixed qualities we possess, but patterns we create through repeated choices. And because we create ourselves through our actions, we can never escape into the comfort of saying this is simply who I am. Who we are is always provisional, always in the process of being made, always demanding that we choose again. This is why Sartre wrote during the occupation, "The absence of traditional freedoms made visible a more fundamental freedom that cannot be taken away by armies or governments. Even when external choices are limited, we remain free in how we interpret our situation, how we respond to it, what meaning we assign to our circumstances. The prisoner is still free to resist or collaborate, to maintain dignity or surrender it, to find meaning in suffering or to despair. This freedom cannot be confiscated because it constitutes the very structure of human consciousness." But here emerges the first hint of the existential dread that will haunt all of Sartre's philosophy. If we are condemned to be free, if there is no escape from the responsibility of creating ourselves, then we can never rest in the security of a fixed identity. We are perpetually unfinished, perpetually facing the abyss of possibility. And most disturbing of all, we cannot even claim that we chose to have this freedom. We did not ask to exist. We did not choose to be creatures who must choose. We find ourselves already thrown into this condition, already burdened with a liberty we never requested. In that café, with the sound of occupation echoing through the streets, Sartre glimpsed something both terrible and magnificent about human existence. We are not products rolling off an assembly line, not chess pieces moving according to predetermined rules, not actors reciting lines written by fate. We are something stranger and more unsettling, beings who create themselves in the very act of existing, who cannot avoid choosing, who bear the full weight of responsibility for what they become. The smoke from his cigarette curled upward in the dim light, dispersing into nothingness, and perhaps in that dissolution he saw an image of human freedom itself, formless, impossible to grasp, disappearing even as we try to define it, yet undeniably present in every moment of conscious existence. Existence before essence. There is a question that has troubled philosophers for millennia, a question so fundamental that entire civilizations have built their moral frameworks around different answers to it. The question is deceptively simple: what comes first, what we are, or that we are? Do we possess an essential nature that defines us before we even take our first breath, or do we spring into existence as blank possibilities, only later sculpting ourselves into something definite? For most of human history, the answer seemed obvious. Religious traditions spoke of souls crafted by divine hands, each one imbued with purpose before entering the world. Philosophers from Plato to Aristotle argued that everything possesses an essential form, a blueprint that determines what it truly is beneath the accidents of its particular existence. Even in more modern times, scientists spoke of human nature as though it were something fixed and discoverable, encoded in our biology or etched into our psychology by evolutionary forces. Sartre stood against this entire tradition and declared something that still sounds radical today: existence precedes essence. These three words contain within them a complete reversal of how we typically understand ourselves. They suggest that we are not created according to a design, that we do not arrive in this world carrying some inner truth waiting to be discovered. Instead, we simply appear thrust into being without reason or purpose, and only afterward, through the accumulation of our choices and actions, do we become anything at all. Imagine waking up one morning to discover that you are not who you thought you were. The memories are still there, the habits and preferences, the history of experiences that seem to define you. But suddenly you recognize that none of this adds up to an essential self, a core identity that could not be otherwise. You see instead that you have been continuously constructing yourself, moment by moment, choice by choice, and that this construction could have gone in infinite other directions. The person you are is not inevitable. It is not written in your genes, or determined by your upbringing, or mandated by your culture. It is something you have made, and something you continue to make with every decision, every action, every stance you take toward the world. This is the vertiginous insight at the heart of Sartre's claim that existence precedes essence. We are not like manufactured objects that fulfill a predetermined function. We are not like characters in a novel whose traits are fixed by an author. We are something more unsettling, beings who exist first as pure possibility, as consciousness thrown into the world without instructions, and who must then decide what to make of this existence. Consider what this means for the concept of human nature. For centuries, people have justified social hierarchies, moral codes, and political systems by appealing to an unchanging human nature. They have said that certain behaviors are natural, that certain roles are suited to particular types of people, that certain truths about what we should be flow inevitably from what we are. But if existence precedes essence, then there is no human nature to appeal to. There is only the human condition, the bare fact of being conscious and free, thrust into a world we did not choose, compelled to make something of ourselves without any guarantee that we are making the right choices. This absence of essential nature is not a deficiency. It is not something we lack that we should hope to recover. It is the very structure of human freedom. Because we have no predetermined essence, we are not confined to being any particular way. The artist is not essentially an artist, destined from birth to create. The coward is not essentially cowardly, trapped by an inborn character flaw. These are roles we step into through repeated choices, patterns we solidify through habitual actions, identities we construct, and then mistake for unchangeable facts about ourselves. But here is where the existential weight becomes almost unbearable. If we create our own essence through our existence, then we can never point to anything outside ourselves to justify what we have become. We cannot blame our parents or our society or our circumstances for who we are, because at every moment we possess the freedom to respond differently to those circumstances. We cannot claim that we were born a certain way, and therefore could not help but act as we did. We are, in Sartre's stark formulation, fully responsible for what we make of ourselves. Think about the implications of this for a moment. Every time we say this is just who I am, we are attempting to fix our essence, to claim that we have arrived at some final truth about ourselves that requires no further examination or change. But this is an evasion. It is what Sartre calls bad faith, a lie we tell ourselves to escape the anxiety of perpetual freedom. Because the truth is that who we are is never finished. We are always in the process of becoming. Our essence is always provisional, always dependent on what we choose to do next. There is something deeply unsettling about living without the security of a fixed nature. It means that we cannot rest in any identity, cannot claim any accomplishment as proof of what we essentially are, cannot point to any past action as evidence that we will inevitably act the same way in the future. We are perpetually unfinished, perpetually facing the necessity of choosing who we will be in this moment. And because we exist before we are anything in particular, we carry within us the burden of infinite possibility. Yet there is also something strangely liberating in this vision. If existence precedes essence, then no condition is permanent. The person who has lived as a coward for 40 years can, in a single moment of choice, begin to become someone else. The one who has accepted a role assigned by society can suddenly recognize that this role is not essential, not inevitable, and step out of it into something new. We are never trapped by what we have been, because what we have been is not what we essentially are. It is only what we have made ourselves thus far. Sartre saw that this freedom is not something we can choose to have or refuse. We do not become free at some point in our lives. We are freedom in the sense that our very mode of being is to exist without predetermined essence, to be nothing but the sum of our choices and the actions that flow from them. And this means that even when we try to escape our freedom, even when we pretend that we are simply following our nature or fulfilling our destiny, we are still exercising the freedom we are trying to deny. In the space between existence and essence, in that gap where we have not yet become anything fixed or final, we discover what it means to be human. We find ourselves suspended over an abyss of possibility, unable to claim the comfort of a predetermined self, condemned to create ourselves without guarantee or guide. The weight of absolute freedom. There is a particular kind of heaviness that settles over us in moments of genuine choice. Not the trivial decisions that fill our days, the selection between coffee or tea, this route or that one, but the choices that seem to determine the shape of our lives. Should I leave or stay? Should I speak or remain silent? Should I commit to this path or abandon it for another? In these moments, we feel something pressing down on us, a weight that has no physical mass, yet feels more burdensome than any object we could carry. Sartre had a name for this weight. He called it the anguish of freedom, and he insisted that this anguish is not a psychological disorder or a temporary discomfort, but a fundamental feature of human existence. We experience this weight because we are free in a way that is absolute and inescapable, and this freedom carries with it a responsibility so vast that most of us spend our entire lives trying to avoid fully recognizing it. When we speak casually about freedom, we usually mean the absence of external constraints. We are free when no one forces us to act against our will, when we possess options and the power to choose among them. This is freedom understood as a condition we sometimes have and sometimes lack, something that can be granted or taken away by circumstances, by governments, by other people. But Sartre speaks of a different kind of freedom entirely, one that cannot be granted or revoked because it constitutes the very structure of human consciousness. This absolute freedom emerges from the fact that consciousness is always at a distance from itself. Unlike a rock, which simply is what it is, or a tree which unfolds according to its nature, human consciousness exists in a perpetual gap between what it has been and what it might become. We are never simply present to ourselves as fixed things. We are always aware of ourselves as beings who could be otherwise, who might choose differently, who face an open future that our current choices will help to create. Think about what happens when you commit to a decision. You choose a career, perhaps, or make a promise to someone you love. In that moment of commitment, you feel that you have closed off other possibilities, that you have bound yourself to a particular course of action. But even as you make this commitment, you remain aware that you could, at any moment, reverse it. The person who promises fidelity knows that they possess the freedom to break this promise. The one who chooses a profession understands that they could abandon it tomorrow. No choice ever fully eliminates the freedom to choose again differently. This is the source of what Sartre calls the anguish of freedom. We cannot escape into the security of a binding commitment because we remain free even after we have committed. Our past choices do not determine our future actions with the necessity of physical laws. They create patterns and tendencies. They establish situations we must now navigate, but they do not remove our freedom to respond to these situations in new ways. And this means that we are perpetually responsible for continuing to choose who we are, even when we desperately wish we could simply be something fixed and final. Consider the weight this places on every action. When you choose, you are not simply selecting an option from a menu of possibilities. You are creating yourself in that moment of choice. You are deciding not only what to do, but who to be. And because there is no essential nature guiding your choice, no cosmic instruction manual telling you which option is truly yours, you must choose without guarantee that you are choosing correctly. You are inventing your values in the very act of choosing according to them. This is why Sartre insists that we are condemned to be free. The word condemned suggests punishment, a sentence imposed against our will, and there is something deeply accurate in this phrasing. We did not choose to be creatures who must choose. We did not ask for this absolute freedom that forces us to create ourselves without guidance or justification. We simply find ourselves already thrown into existence as beings for whom freedom is not optional, but structural, not a gift but a burden we cannot set down. Most of us find ways to avoid fully acknowledging this weight. We tell ourselves that our choices are determined by our personality, as though personality were something fixed rather than a pattern we have created and continue to create through repeated choices. We claim that circumstances left us no real option, as though the absence of pleasant alternatives eliminated our freedom to choose among unpleasant ones. We point to our values and beliefs as though these were external forces that compel our actions rather than commitments we must perpetually renew through our choices. But these evasions cannot eliminate the freedom they attempt to deny. Even the person who claims they had no choice is choosing to interpret their situation as one that left them no choice. Even the one who says they were simply following their nature is choosing to identify with certain patterns and to treat them as determinative. We are always free, and this freedom manifests as an inescapable weight that presses on us whenever we act with full consciousness of what we are doing. There is something almost cruel in this vision of human existence. It offers no comfort, no reassurance that we are on the right path, no cosmic validation for our choices. It suggests instead that we are alone with our freedom, radically responsible for what we make of ourselves, unable to appeal to anything outside our own choices to justify the lives we create. The universe does not care which path we take. There is no hidden purpose waiting to be discovered, no true self we need to become. There is only the perpetual necessity of choosing, the endless weight of freedom that we cannot escape or transfer to another. Yet within this weight, there is also a strange dignity. If we are absolutely free, then we are also absolutely responsible. We cannot be reduced to our circumstances or explained away by our history. We are not mechanisms responding predictably to inputs, not products of forces beyond our control. We are beings who create meaning through our choices, who bring values into existence through our commitments, who bear the full weight of authoring our own lives. The anguish of freedom is not something we can overcome or transcend. It is not a problem to be solved, but a fundamental feature of conscious existence. As long as we are aware of ourselves, as beings who must choose, as long as we recognize the gap between what we have been and what we might become, we will feel this weight pressing down on us. And perhaps the only honest response is to acknowledge it fully, to stop seeking refuge in the illusion of necessity, and to accept that we are carrying a burden no external authority can lift. In the space between one choice and the next, in that moment before we commit to an action, we feel the full weight of human freedom bearing down on us like an immense sky pressing against our shoulders. Bad faith and the waiter. Watch a waiter move through a crowded cafe. Notice how he carries the tray, the precision of his gestures, the particular way he bends at the waist when taking an order. His movements are almost mechanical in their exactness, performed with a kind of exaggerated care that seems slightly too perfect, slightly too deliberate. He is playing at being a waiter in a way that suggests he is trying to convince himself and everyone watching that this is what he truly is. Not a person who happens to work as a waiter, but someone whose very being is exhausted by this role. Sartre observed this phenomenon with fascination. He saw in the waiter's performance something universal, a pattern that extends far beyond the walls of any café. He saw a person attempting to escape from freedom by pretending to be a thing, by acting as though his identity were as fixed and determined as the furniture around him. This attempt to flee from the burden of freedom, this lie we tell ourselves about what we are, Sartre named bad faith. Bad faith is not simple deception. It is not the liar who knows the truth and deliberately conceals it from others. It is something more subtle and more pervasive, a peculiar form of self-deception in which we are simultaneously the deceiver and the deceived. We know the truth about our freedom, and yet we arrange things so that we can pretend not to know it. We are aware that we are choosing, and yet we act as though we have no choice. We understand that we could be otherwise, and yet we behave as though we are trapped in a fixed identity. Consider the waiter again. He arrives at work and steps into his role as one might step into a costume. But unlike a costume which we know we are wearing and can remove at any moment, the waiter tries to convince himself that this role defines his being. When he performs his duties with that mechanical precision, he is attempting to coincide with his function in the way that a knife coincides with its purpose of cutting or a hammer with its purpose of striking. He wants to be a waiter in the same way that objects simply are what they are, without the gap of consciousness, without the burden of choosing moment by moment to continue being this thing. But this coincidence is impossible. The waiter cannot actually become his function because human consciousness always maintains a distance from whatever it identifies with. Even as he performs his role perfectly, he remains aware that he is performing it, that he could perform it differently or abandon it entirely. The very effort he puts into being a perfect waiter reveals that he is not naturally or essentially a waiter, but someone who must continuously choose to act this way. This is the structure of bad faith. We attempt to be what we are in the mode of not being it. We try to possess a fixed identity while remaining the consciousness that is always at a distance from any identity it assumes. We want the security of being something definite, something we can point to and say, this is what I am, while retaining the freedom that makes us human. And because these two desires contradict each other, we exist in a state of perpetual self-deception, lying to ourselves in a way that requires us to know the truth, even as we deny it. Think about how often we engage in this same pattern. Someone says, I am just a pessimist, or I am naturally shy, or this is simply who I am. And in making these claims, they are attempting to transform a pattern of choices into an unchangeable fact of their being. They are treating themselves as objects with fixed properties rather than as consciousness perpetually free to respond differently. The statement, this is who I am, functions as an excuse, a way of evading responsibility for continuing to choose to be this way. Or consider the person who claims they had no choice in a difficult situation. Perhaps they acted cruelly or cowardly, and now they insist that circumstances left them no alternative. But in saying, I had no choice, they are choosing to interpret their situation as one that eliminated their freedom. They are adopting the perspective that their action was as determined as a stone rolling downhill, that they were merely responding to forces beyond their control. Yet this very interpretation is itself a choice, an act of bad faith that denies the freedom it exercises. Bad faith appears whenever we try to escape the anguish of freedom by pretending we are not free. It shows up in the person who says they were simply following orders, as though following orders were not itself a choice. It manifests in those who claim they were only doing what anyone would have done in their situation, as though there were a universal law of behavior that eliminated individual responsibility. It emerges in the one who insists they could not help themselves, as though human action were as automatic as digestion or breathing. What makes bad faith so insidious is that it can never fully succeed, and yet we can never fully escape it either. We cannot succeed because we remain conscious of our freedom even as we deny it. The waiter knows he is playing at being a waiter. The person claiming they had no choice knows they are choosing to see themselves as choiceless. The one who identifies completely with a fixed identity knows at some level that this identity is something they maintain through continued choice rather than something they simply are. But we also cannot escape bad faith because the alternative is to live constantly in the full recognition of our absolute freedom, to acknowledge at every moment that we are choosing ourselves without guarantee or justification. This recognition brings with it the anguish we have already explored, the weight of responsibility that presses down on us whenever we act with full awareness of what we are doing. Bad faith offers temporary relief from this weight, even if the relief is itself a form of self-deception. Sartre suggests that most of us live in a perpetual oscillation between bad faith and anguish. We recognize our freedom for a moment, feel the full weight of it, and then retreat into some form of self-deception that allows us to pretend we are less free than we are. We claim to be following our nature, or our values, or our circumstances, and in doing so we briefly escape the responsibility of acknowledging that we are choosing to identify with these things rather than being determined by them. The waiter continues his performance, carrying his tray with exaggerated precision, bending at exactly the right angle, speaking in the tone he believes a waiter should speak in. He is trying so hard to be what he is that his very effort betrays the freedom he is attempting to deny. And in this performance, we see reflected our own attempts to escape into fixed identities, to become things rather than remain consciousness, to avoid the perpetual responsibility of creating ourselves. There is no final resolution to this pattern, no way to simply choose authenticity and be done with bad faith forever. We are always tempted to retreat from our freedom, always seeking refuge in the lie that we are something fixed and final rather than perpetually in the process of becoming. And perhaps the first step toward living more honestly is simply to recognize this pattern, to notice when we are playing at being what we claim to be, to acknowledge the gap between our freedom and the roles we perform. The look of the other. There is a moment that recurs throughout our lives, a moment so common we rarely pause to examine its strangeness. You are alone in a room, perhaps doing something private, something you would not do if others were watching. You are completely absorbed in your own world, moving through space as the center of your own experience, when suddenly you hear a sound, footsteps, a door opening, and you realize someone is watching you. In that instant, something fundamental shifts. The world that a moment ago revolved around you as its organizing center suddenly reorganizes itself around another consciousness. You are no longer the one who sees, but the one who is seen. Your body, which felt like a transparent instrument of your will, suddenly becomes an object in someone else's field of vision. You become aware of yourself from the outside as a thing that can be judged, categorized, defined by another person's gaze. Sartre called this experience the look, and he believed it revealed something essential about human relationships. The look is not simply the physical act of seeing. It is the recognition that another consciousness exists, and that this consciousness has the power to transform you from subject into object, from the one who experiences into something that is experienced. In the presence of the other's gaze, you discover that you exist not only for yourself, but also in yourself, as an object that can be observed, evaluated, and defined by perspectives you do not control. Think about what happens in this moment of being seen. Before the other appeared, you were pure freedom, a consciousness moving through the world without self-consciousness, absorbed in your projects and perceptions. But the instant you become aware of being watched, you experience yourself as the other might experience you. You see your body as it appears from the outside, your actions as they might be interpreted by someone else, your intentions as they could be misunderstood or judged. You become, in a sense, split between the self you are for yourself and the self you are for the other. This splitting is not merely psychological. It is ontological, a fundamental feature of what it means to exist in a world with other consciousnesses. When you are alone, you exist primarily as what Sartre calls being for itself, as pure consciousness perpetually transcending whatever it has been toward future possibilities. But in the presence of the other's look, you also become being for others, an object with observable characteristics, a body that occupies space and time, a person who can be described and judged according to criteria you did not choose. Consider the power this gives to the other. Through their look, they freeze you in a definition, transform your freedom into a fixed essence, make you into something that can be known and labeled. The other sees you as shy or confident, attractive or unattractive, threatening or harmless, and in seeing you this way they create a version of you that exists outside your control. You cannot prevent them from forming this judgment. You cannot force them to see you as you see yourself. Their consciousness escapes your grasp in the same way your consciousness escapes theirs. This is why Sartre suggests that conflict is the original meaning of being for others. The other threatens your freedom by turning you into an object. They impose upon you an identity that exists in their consciousness, a fixed definition that contradicts your experience of yourself as pure possibility. And because you cannot control how they see you, cannot force them to recognize your freedom rather than reducing you to a set of observable traits, you exist in perpetual tension with every consciousness that looks upon you. But here's the paradox. Even as the other's look objectifies you, you need this objectification. You cannot know yourself as an object without the mediation of another consciousness. When you are alone, you are pure transparency to yourself, a perspective on the world rather than something in the world. You can observe your body, but you cannot experience your body as others experience it. You can reflect on your actions, but you cannot see yourself acting from the outside. The other's look gives you access to a dimension of yourself that would otherwise remain forever hidden. This means we are dependent on others for a crucial aspect of our self-knowledge. We need them to reveal to us what we are in the world, to show us how we appear, to give us an identity that we can never fully give ourselves. Yet this dependence is also a vulnerability. We cannot control what the other sees when they look at us. We cannot determine the judgment they form or the definition they impose. We are at their mercy, hoping they will recognize our freedom while knowing they are more likely to reduce us to a convenient category. Watch what happens when you become aware of being watched. You feel shame, perhaps, if you were doing something you wish to hide, or pride. if you believe the other will judge you favorably, or anxiety about how you appear, a sudden self-consciousness about your body, your posture, your expression. All of these reactions stem from the recognition that you exist for the other in a way you cannot fully control, that they possess a perspective on you that escapes your grasp, that they are making you into an object even as you try to remain free. Sartre describes walking through a park and peering through a keyhole, absorbed in whatever scene lies beyond. In this moment, you exist purely as consciousness, as the perspective from which the world is observed. But then you hear footsteps behind you, and suddenly you become the one observed, the person caught in the shameful act of spying. The world reorganizes itself around the other's perspective, and you are reduced to a fixed definition, the voyeur, the one who was peering through the keyhole. The freedom you were a moment ago collapses into the shameful object you have become for the other. This pattern repeats endlessly in human interaction. Every time we meet another person, we engage in a struggle over who will define whom, who will remain subject, and who will be reduced to object. We try to grasp the other's freedom, to understand their perspective, to predict their judgments, but their freedom escapes us, just as our freedom escapes them. We can never fully possess another consciousness, never completely control how they see us, never eliminate the threat their look poses to our own sense of freedom. Yet we also cannot escape into solitude. We need others to confirm our existence, to give us an identity in the world, to reflect back to us something we cannot see for ourselves. We are caught between the desire for recognition and the fear of objectification, between needing the other's look and resenting the power it has over us. And in this tension, we discover something fundamental about human existence. We are always both subject and object, both freedom and facticity, both consciousness and body, existing in a perpetual struggle to remain what we are for ourselves, while inevitably becoming what we are for others. The look of the other will find us wherever we go, transforming us from pure consciousness into visible beings who can be seen, judged, and defined by perspectives we do not control. Hell is other people. There is perhaps no phrase from Sartre's work that has been more widely quoted and more thoroughly misunderstood than this: hell is other people. It appears at the end of his play No Exit, spoken by a character trapped for eternity in a room with two others, unable to escape their judgment, unable to close his eyes or turn away from their gazes. Most people interpret this as misanthropy, as a declaration that human relationships are inherently toxic, that we would be better off alone. But Sartre meant something far more subtle and far more disturbing. The play presents a peculiar vision of the afterlife. Three people find themselves in a drawing room furnished in Second Empire style, a room with no mirrors, no windows, and most significantly, no way to escape. They have been brought together not by chance but by design, each one perfectly chosen to torment the others without the need for physical punishment. There are no demons, no flames, no instruments of torture. There is only the perpetual presence of other consciousnesses, other gazes that see each person in ways they cannot control. One character is a coward who wants desperately to be seen as brave. Another is a cruel woman who wants to be seen as innocent. The third seeks love and validation, but can only drive others away. Each person depends on the others to provide the self-image they crave, but each is perfectly positioned to deny the others what they most need. They are locked in a perpetual struggle for recognition that can never be resolved, each one trying to force the others to see them as they wish to be seen, each one failing because the others have their own needs and their own perspective. This is what Sartre means when he says hell is other people. He does not mean that all human interaction is hellish. He means that we depend on others for our sense of ourselves, that we need their recognition to confirm our existence and validate our projects, but that we can never control how they see us. We are at their mercy, hoping they will recognize our freedom and acknowledge our self-chosen identity, yet knowing they are more likely to fix us in definitions that suit their own needs. Think about what this dependency means. When you are alone, you exist primarily for yourself, as pure consciousness engaged in your projects and perceptions. You do not need to justify your existence or prove your worth. You simply are, moving through the world according to your own intentions and desires. But the moment another person appears, you become aware that you exist also for them, that they possess a perspective on you that escapes your control, that they are forming judgments and making interpretations that define who you are in their eyes. And you discover that you care about these judgments. You want the other to see you in a particular way, to recognize certain qualities in you, to validate the image you have of yourself. You want to be seen as intelligent or attractive or good or whatever else matters to you. But you cannot force the other to see you this way. Their consciousness is free, just as yours is. They will see what they see, judge as they judge, and there is nothing you can do to guarantee that their perception aligns with your self-perception. This creates a fundamental conflict at the heart of human relationships. You need the other to give you an identity in the world, to confirm that you are what you believe yourself to be. But the other has their own needs, their own projects, their own way of seeing. They may reduce you to a convenient category that serves their purposes rather than recognizing your full humanity. They may see in you qualities you do not wish to possess or fail to see qualities you consider essential. And because you cannot control their perspective, you remain perpetually vulnerable to being misrecognized, misunderstood, reduced to something less than you are. The three characters in No Exit embody this conflict in its most extreme form. They are trapped together for eternity, unable to leave, unable to close their eyes, unable to escape the judgments they impose on each other. Each one needs the validation of the others, yet each one can only see the others through the lens of their own needs and fears. They are locked in a perpetual struggle that can never be won, each trying to force the others to recognize them in a way that would require the others to deny their own needs. But this hell is not limited to the afterlife. It manifests in every relationship where we depend on another person to validate our existence, yet cannot control how they see us. It appears in the couple where one person desperately needs to be loved but cannot make the other love them in the right way. It emerges in the friendship where one person seeks recognition of their accomplishments but receives only indifference or judgment. It shows up in the workplace where we perform our competence, hoping for acknowledgement while knowing that others may interpret our actions according to their own agendas. Consider what this means for human connection. We seek relationships because we need others to give us an identity in the world, to confirm that we exist and matter, to validate our projects and purposes. But the very act of seeking this validation places us in a position of vulnerability. We make ourselves dependent on perspectives we cannot control. We give the other power over our sense of ourselves. And because the other is free, because they have their own needs and their own way of seeing, there is no guarantee they will give us what we seek. This is why Sartre suggests that love, as we typically understand it, is a doomed project. We want the other to choose us freely, to recognize our unique value, to validate our existence through their love. But we also want some guarantee that they will continue to love us, some assurance that their freedom will not lead them away from us. We want them to be free to choose us yet bound to choose us. We want them to validate us through a choice that is both free and necessary, and this contradictory desire ensures that love will always fall short of what we hope for. The three characters in their eternal drawing room represent an extreme version of a pattern that runs through all human interaction. We are social beings who need recognition from others, yet we are also free consciousnesses who cannot fully control or be controlled by other consciousnesses. We are trapped in relationships where we depend on others, yet resent this dependency, where we seek validation yet fear objectification, where we need the other's look yet suffer under its power to define us. Hell is not other people in general. Hell is the condition of depending on others for our sense of ourselves, while being unable to control how they see us, of needing their recognition while knowing it can be withdrawn at any moment, of seeking validation from free consciousnesses who have their own needs and their own projects that may not align with ours. Hell is the perpetual tension between our need for others and the threat their freedom poses to our own sense of freedom. And there is no exit from this condition. As long as we exist in a world with other consciousnesses, as long as we need recognition and validation, we will remain vulnerable to being seen in ways we do not choose, defined by perspectives we cannot control, caught in the perpetual struggle for recognition that can never be finally resolved. Radical responsibility. There exists a moment in every crisis when we reach for an explanation that will absolve us. The circumstances were impossible. Anyone would have acted the same way. Forces beyond my control determined what happened. These statements feel like relief, like shelter from the storm of guilt or regret. They suggest that we were not truly responsible, that the outcome was inevitable given the situation, that we are victims of conditions rather than authors of our choices. But Sartre stands before us blocking this escape route and insists on something almost unbearable. We are radically responsible for everything we do and everything we become. The word radical here carries its full weight. This is not the limited responsibility we usually acknowledge, the admission that we made a mistake within a generally acceptable range of behavior. This is responsibility that reaches down to the roots of our existence, that encompasses not only our actions but also our interpretations of situations, our emotional responses, our very way of being in the world. Sartre claims that we are responsible even for things that seem completely outside our control, even for the meaning we assign to circumstances we did not choose. Consider what this implies. You did not choose to be born. You did not select your parents, your genetic inheritance, your historical moment, or your initial circumstances. All of this was given to you without your consent. Yet Sartre insists that you are responsible for what you make of these givens. You are responsible for how you interpret your past, for which aspects of your situation you emphasize and which you minimize, for the way you let circumstances shape your projects or refuse to let them determine your path. Think about someone who grows up in difficult circumstances and later points to these circumstances as the explanation for their failures or limitations. Sartre would say that this person is choosing to let circumstances define them, choosing to interpret their situation as one that made certain outcomes inevitable. Another person might face the same circumstances and interpret them differently, seeing them as obstacles to overcome rather than determinants of destiny. Both people are responsible for their interpretation, for the meaning they assign to facts that are themselves neutral. This extends even to emotions. We tend to think of emotions as things that happen to us, as involuntary responses to situations. We say, "I could not help feeling angry," or "I was overcome with fear," as though emotions were forces from outside that invaded us against our will. But Sartre suggests that emotions are choices, ways we engage with the world, strategies we adopt for dealing with situations we find overwhelming. When you feel fear, you are choosing to interpret a situation as threatening and choosing to respond to that threat through retreat. When you feel anger, you are choosing to see an injustice and choosing to respond with aggressive energy. This does not mean emotions are easy to change or that we consciously deliberate about which emotion to feel. It means that emotions are not separate from our freedom, not external forces that determine our actions. They are ways we exercise our freedom, ways we take up a stance toward the world. And because they are choices, we are responsible for them, responsible for the way we let fear paralyze us or allow anger to justify cruelty. The implications of radical responsibility become even more disturbing when we consider extreme situations. What about the prisoner who confesses under torture? What about the soldier who commits atrocities while following orders? What about the person trapped in poverty who steals to survive? Surely these people are not fully responsible. Surely their circumstances reduce their freedom to the point where responsibility becomes meaningless. But Sartre does not grant even these exceptions. He acknowledges that circumstances can make certain choices extremely difficult or costly. He recognizes that some situations present us with impossible dilemmas, where every option involves some form of suffering or wrongdoing. But he insists that even in these extreme cases, we remain free to choose how we respond. The prisoner can refuse to confess and accept the consequences. The soldier can refuse the order and face the punishment. The person in poverty can choose not to steal despite the suffering this choice entails. These may not be choices we can fairly expect people to make. They may involve a level of sacrifice that goes beyond what we consider reasonable to demand. But they remain choices. The prisoner who confesses is choosing to preserve himself at the cost of betraying others. The soldier who follows orders is choosing obedience over disobedience. The person who steals is choosing survival through theft over suffering through honesty. And because these remain choices, they involve responsibility, even if we judge the person's choice sympathetically given their circumstances. This vision of radical responsibility eliminates all refuge in necessity. We cannot say we had no choice, because even the most constrained situation presents us with the choice of how to respond to our constraints. We cannot say circumstances made us who we are, because we chose how to interpret those circumstances and how to let them influence our projects. We cannot say our emotions overwhelmed us, because emotions are ways we engage with the world rather than forces that happen to us against our will. Watch what this does to the concept of victimhood. In ordinary discourse, we understand a victim as someone who suffered harm through no fault of their own, someone whose suffering was imposed by forces beyond their control. And there is obvious truth to this. People do suffer harm they did not deserve and did not cause. They are treated unjustly, subjected to violence, placed in impossible situations by the actions of others, or by impersonal forces of history and circumstance. But Sartre adds a troubling dimension to this picture. Even the victim is responsible for how they respond to their victimization, for the meaning they assign to their suffering, for what they choose to become in the aftermath of harm. They can let victimization define them, can adopt the identity of victim as a way of avoiding responsibility for their present and future. Or they can acknowledge the harm while refusing to be defined by it, can take responsibility for creating something new from the ruins of what was done to them. This is perhaps the most difficult aspect of Sartrean responsibility to accept. It seems to blame the victim, to add insult to injury, by suggesting that those who have suffered are responsible for their response to suffering. Yet Sartre is not denying the reality of oppression or dismissing the impact of harm. He is insisting that even in the face of oppression and harm, human consciousness remains free to take up a stance toward its situation, to choose what meaning to assign to circumstances, to decide what to make of what has been made of it. Radical responsibility means that excuses do not exist. We cannot appeal to our nature, our circumstances, our emotions, our past, or any other factor as an explanation that absolves us of responsibility. We are what we choose to be, and we are responsible for this choice even when we did not choose the situation in which we had to choose. We are authors of our lives even when we are writing on paper we did not select, with ink we did not mix, in a language we did not invent. This responsibility extends forward through every moment. We are responsible not only for what we have done, but for what we continue to do, not only for who we have become, but for who we continue to choose to be. There is no point at which we can rest in a fixed identity and say this is who I am, as though what we are were a fact that eliminates future responsibility. Every moment presents us anew with the necessity of choosing, and every choice carries the full weight of responsibility. In this vision, there is no refuge, no appeal, no authority outside ourselves to which we can transfer the burden of responsibility. We stand alone with our freedom, radically responsible for our existence, unable to escape into any form of necessity or determinism that would lift this weight from our shoulders. The absurdity of being. There comes a moment in certain quiet hours when the ordinary world reveals itself as profoundly strange. You are performing some routine task, perhaps washing dishes or walking down a familiar street, when suddenly the automaticity falls away and you become aware of the sheer peculiarity of existence itself. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does this particular configuration of matter constitute a person, while that configuration constitutes a stone? What justifies the existence of anything at all? This moment of recognition, when the world loses its taken-for-granted quality and appears in its raw contingency, is what Sartre called the experience of absurdity. It is not absurdity in the colloquial sense of something ridiculous or illogical. It is the recognition that existence has no reason, no justification, no necessity. Things simply are, without explanation or foundation, and this groundlessness extends to everything, including ourselves. Most of the time, we are shielded from this recognition by the structures of everyday life. We wake up with tasks to accomplish, roles to fulfill, meanings we have constructed or inherited. The world appears as a network of purposes and functions. The chair exists for sitting, the knife for cutting, the street for traveling from one place to another. Everything has its place in a web of human projects and intentions. We move through this world as though its meanings were inherent properties of things rather than interpretations we impose upon them. But occasionally the veil tears, and we glimpse what lies beneath. We see that the chair is not essentially for sitting, but merely a particular arrangement of wood or metal that we have decided to use for sitting. The knife does not contain cutting in its nature, but is simply shaped matter we employ for certain purposes. The street is not fundamentally a path, but pavement we interpret as a route. All the meanings we take as given are revealed as constructions, as ways we organize raw existence into something comprehensible and useful. Sartre experienced this recognition with particular intensity in a moment he describes in his novel Nausea. The protagonist sits in a park, staring at the root of a chestnut tree, and suddenly the root refuses to stay within the conceptual categories that usually contain it. It is no longer simply a root, a functional part of a tree. It becomes instead a brute fact of existence, a thing that is utterly contingent, that might not have existed, that has no reason for being the way it is. The words we use to describe it feel inadequate, like labels pasted onto something that exceeds all attempts to capture it in language. This is the absurdity at the heart of existence. Nothing has to be. Everything that exists could just as easily not exist. There is no cosmic plan that required the universe to unfold in this particular way, no necessity that demanded your existence or mine. We are radically contingent beings in a contingent world, and this contingency has no explanation, no justification beyond the bare fact that here we are. Think about what this means for the search for meaning. We often assume that meaning is something we discover, as though it were already present in the world waiting for us to find it. We speak of finding our purpose or discovering our calling, as though these were hidden truths about ourselves that we need only uncover. But if existence is absurd, if things have no inherent reason for being, then there is no hidden meaning waiting to be discovered. There is only the meaning we create through our choices and commitments. This recognition can feel like a loss. It suggests that the universe is fundamentally indifferent to our existence, that there is no grand narrative in which our lives play a meaningful part, that we are not fulfilling some cosmic purpose, but simply existing without deeper justification. The comfort of believing that everything happens for a reason dissolves when we recognize that things simply happen, that existence precedes any reasons we might construct to explain it. Yet there is also something liberating in this vision. If existence has no predetermined meaning, then we are free to create whatever meanings we choose. We are not bound to fulfill a purpose assigned to us by nature or God or history. We are not failing if we do not discover our true calling, because there is no true calling to discover. We are simply free to commit ourselves to whatever projects we choose, to create value through our engagement with the world, to impose meaning on existence that would otherwise remain meaningless. The absurdity of existence reveals itself most clearly in the gap between our desire for justification and the absence of any ultimate foundation. We want our existence to be necessary, to be guaranteed by something beyond mere contingency. We want to believe that we had to be, that our lives have a purpose that justifies the pain and struggle of existing. But the world offers no such guarantee. We simply find ourselves existing, thrown into being without explanation, confronted with the task of making something of this existence without any assurance that what we make matters in any cosmic sense. Consider how we typically avoid this recognition. We immerse ourselves in busyness, filling every moment with tasks and distractions. We adopt ready-made meanings provided by our culture, our religion, our social roles. We tell ourselves stories about who we are and why we exist, constructing narratives that give shape to the formless contingency of our being. All of these strategies serve to shield us from the direct encounter with absurdity, to maintain the illusion that existence has inherent meaning and purpose. But the absurd has a way of breaking through. It appears in moments of crisis when our usual meanings fail us. It emerges in the face of death, which reveals the ultimate contingency of our existence. It shows up in experiences of profound alienation when the familiar world suddenly seems strange and our place in it uncertain. It manifests in the question that children sometimes ask and adults learn to stop asking, why is there anything at all? Sartre suggests that we cannot overcome the absurdity of existence. We cannot discover a foundation that would make existence necessary rather than contingent. We cannot find a cosmic purpose that would justify being rather than non-being. The absurd is not a problem to be solved, but a fundamental feature of existence that we must learn to live with. And perhaps the only authentic response is to acknowledge this absurdity fully, to stop seeking justifications that do not exist, and to embrace the freedom that comes from recognizing that we create our own meanings in a world that offers no inherent meaning. There is a kind of vertigo that accompanies this recognition. The ground beneath us is revealed as groundless. The meanings we relied upon are shown to be constructions. The necessity we craved dissolves into pure contingency. We are left suspended over an abyss of meaninglessness, free to create meaning, but unable to claim that the meanings we create are anything more than our own inventions. This is the peculiar position of human consciousness in Sartre's philosophy. We exist without reason, in a world without reason, yet we are beings who demand reasons, who seek meaning, who cannot help but organize the chaos of existence into patterns we can comprehend. We are condemned to create meaning in a universe that remains fundamentally absurd, to impose purpose on existence that has no inherent purpose, to live as though our lives matter even while recognizing that they might not matter at all in any cosmic sense. The chestnut root remains in the park, indifferent to whether anyone sees it, existing without justification or purpose, a brute fact of being that exceeds all our attempts to explain it. And in this strange persistence of things that simply are, we glimpse the absurdity that underlies everything, the radical contingency that makes existence both terrifying and strangely beautiful in its very groundlessness. Nausea and the contingency of existence. There is a sickness that does not come from the body. It arrives without warning, a wave of revulsion that has no clear object. You might be sitting in a café, or walking through a familiar room, or holding an everyday object in your hand, when suddenly everything becomes too much. The colors are too vivid, the textures too present, the sheer there-ness of things overwhelms you. This is not nausea in the medical sense, though it may manifest as a physical sensation. This is what Sartre called nausea, the visceral response to confronting existence in its raw, unjustified abundance. Sartre wrote an entire novel around this experience, tracing the psychological unraveling of a man who can no longer take the world for granted. The protagonist finds himself increasingly unable to maintain the comfortable distance that usually separates consciousness from the brute fact of existence. Objects refuse to stay within their assigned meanings. A pebble on the beach, a hand resting on a table, the root of a tree in a public garden, each becomes unbearable in its sheer facticity, its stubborn insistence on existing without reason or purpose. What provokes this nausea is the recognition of contingency in its most radical form. We have already explored the idea that existence is contingent, that things simply are without necessity or justification. But nausea is what happens when this intellectual recognition becomes a lived experience, when the abstract idea crashes into consciousness with such force that it produces a physical response. It is the moment when you not only understand that existence is unjustified, but feel this lack of justification in your gut. Consider what the world looks like when stripped of the meanings we habitually impose upon it. We organize reality into useful categories, dividing it into objects with clear boundaries and definite purposes. We say this is a chair, that is a tree, here is a person. These labels create order out of chaos, transform the overwhelming flux of sensation into something manageable and comprehensible. But what happens when these labels fail, when the thing itself pushes through the concept we use to contain it? This is the heart of nausea. The thing refuses to be only what we say it is. It exceeds our categories, overflows the boundaries we try to impose. You look at your hand, and suddenly it is not simply your hand, not merely the familiar instrument you use without thinking. It becomes a strange object, a piece of flesh attached to your body, pulsing with blood, covered in skin that has texture and temperature. It is too present, too insistently there, and you cannot make it retreat back into the comfortable invisibility of the everyday. Sartre describes this experience as an encounter with the viscous quality of existence. Things have a kind of stickiness, a cloying presence that adheres to consciousness. You cannot maintain the clean separation between yourself and the world. Existence seeps into you, forces itself upon your awareness, refuses to maintain a respectful distance. And in this forced intimacy with the brute fact of being, you experience revulsion at the sheer abundance of existence, at its lack of restraint, at the way it simply is without asking permission or providing justification. The nausea is not directed at any particular thing. It is a response to existence as such, to the fact that there is something rather than nothing. And what makes this fact nauseating is precisely that it has no explanation. Things exist in a kind of obscene excess. They are superfluous, unnecessary, yet undeniably present. Nothing required them to be, yet here they are, crowding into awareness with their weight and texture and stubborn facticity. Think about how we usually protect ourselves from this recognition. We live within elaborate structures of meaning that give everything a place and a purpose. We are busy with projects that make the world appear as a field of instruments and obstacles, things that help or hinder our goals. We are absorbed in our social roles, our relationships, our habits and routines. All of this creates a comfortable distance from the raw fact of existence. We experience the world as meaningful, as organized around human purposes, and this meaningful organization shields us from confronting existence in its groundless contingency. But occasionally something disrupts this protective structure. Perhaps it is fatigue or illness, or some shift in mood that loosens our grip on ordinary meanings. Perhaps it is a moment of solitude when the social world falls away, and we are left alone with existence itself. Whatever the cause, the usual meanings suddenly seem inadequate. The world refuses to stay within the categories we use to organize it. And in this refusal, we experience the nausea that comes from confronting existence without the mediation of purpose or meaning. Sartre suggests that nausea reveals something true about our condition. We are beings who exist in the mode of seeking justification for existence, yet existence offers no justification. We crave necessity, yet we are radically contingent. We want meaning to be inherent in the world, yet we discover that meaning is something we impose rather than discover. This gap between our desire for justification and the absence of any ultimate ground produces the nausea that surfaces when we confront existence directly. The experience is profoundly disorienting because it undermines the very foundation on which we build our lives. If existence is contingent and unjustified, then what grounds our choices? If things simply are without reason, then what makes any particular way of being preferable to any other? The comfortable certainties we rely upon dissolve in the face of this recognition, and we are left suspended over a void of meaninglessness. Yet Sartre does not counsel despair in the face of nausea. He suggests instead that this experience, however uncomfortable, represents a kind of honesty. It is what happens when we stop lying to ourselves about the nature of existence, when we cease pretending that there is some hidden foundation that would make everything necessary and meaningful. Nausea is the price of seeing clearly, the discomfort that accompanies the recognition of how things truly are. And perhaps there is even something valuable in this discomfort. It strips away the false securities we construct, forces us to acknowledge that we are creating meaning rather than discovering it, reveals the freedom that lies at the heart of existence. When the nausea passes, when we return to the world of purposes and projects, we might carry with us a trace of this recognition. We might act with less certainty that our meanings are the only possible meanings, with more awareness that we are choosing to create value in a world that offers no inherent values. The nausea may return. It tends to recur in certain moods or moments when our defenses are weakened, but each encounter with it deepens our understanding of existence and its radical contingency, its unjustified abundance, its stubborn refusal to provide the justification we crave. And in learning to live with this nausea, in acknowledging it without being destroyed by it, we approach something like authenticity, a way of existing that accepts the groundlessness of existence without fleeing into false necessities. The world remains too present, too abundant, too insistently there. Existence continues to exceed all our attempts to explain or justify it. And somewhere in the gap between our craving for meaning and the silent indifference of things, nausea waits to remind us of the truth we spend most of our lives trying to forget. The for itself and the in itself. Imagine two fundamentally different ways of being. On one side, picture a stone resting in a field. It simply is what it is, solid and complete, with no awareness of itself, no distance between what it is and its being. It does not wonder about its existence or question its nature. It possesses a kind of fullness, a total coincidence with itself that admits no gap, no separation, no internal division. This is what Sartre calls being in itself, the mode of existence characteristic of objects, of things that simply are. Now picture yourself in this moment, reading these words, aware not only of the words, but of yourself reading them. You are conscious of your consciousness. You can reflect on your own thoughts, question your own motives, imagine yourself being different from what you currently are. Unlike the stone, you do not coincide with yourself. There is always a gap between you as you are and you as you might be, between your present state and your awareness of that state. This is what Sartre calls being for itself, the mode of existence characteristic of human consciousness. These two modes of being represent a fundamental division in the structure of reality. The in itself is characterized by absolute positivity, by simply being what it is without remainder or excess. It has no relationship to itself because relationship requires distance, and the in itself admits no distance. It is dense, opaque, self-identical. A rock is a rock is a rock, with no internal questioning, no self-reflection, no possibility of being other than what it is in any given moment. The for itself, by contrast, is characterized by a fundamental negativity. It is what it is not, and is not what it is. This paradoxical formulation captures something essential about consciousness. You are not your past, though your past belongs to you. You are not your future, though you are constantly projecting yourself toward it. You are not any fixed essence, any determinate thing you could point to and say, this is what I am, in the way a stone is what it is. Instead, you exist as a perpetual gap, a distance from yourself, a being that is always in question. Think about what this means. The stone has no problem of being. It does not struggle with identity or wonder what it should become. It simply exists with the full density of thinghood, completely present to itself, in the mode of not being present to itself at all, since presence requires the division of consciousness. But you have the problem of being built into your very structure. You are separated from yourself by the gap of consciousness. You can never simply be in the way the stone is, because you are always aware of being, always at a distance from whatever you are in any moment. This gap is what creates human freedom, because you do not coincide with yourself, because you are not a fixed thing, but a consciousness that is always ahead of itself or behind itself, but never fully present to itself. You are free to be otherwise than you are. You can imagine different possibilities. You can question your current state. You can project yourself toward a future that does not yet exist. The for itself is free because it is nothing, because it has no fixed nature that would determine what it must be. But this freedom comes at a cost. The in itself, in its massive self-identity, possesses a kind of peace that consciousness can never achieve. The stone does not suffer from anxiety about what it should become. It does not experience the vertigo of possibility or the weight of having to create itself. It simply is, with a fullness and completeness that consciousness constantly desires but can never attain. Here emerges one of Sartre's most haunting claims. Consciousness desires to become in itself while remaining for itself. We want the fullness and self-identity of things while retaining the awareness and freedom of consciousness. We want to be something definite, something we can point to and say, this is what I am, yet we also want to remain free, to retain the ability to transcend whatever we are toward new possibilities. We want to achieve a fixed identity without losing our freedom. We want to be God, a being that is both fully self-determined and fully self-identical. But this desire is contradictory at its core. The for itself is for itself precisely because it is not in itself. Consciousness is consciousness because it is not a thing. The moment we achieve the fullness and self-identity we desire, we would cease to be conscious. We would become objects, stones, things that simply are without the gap of awareness. And so we are caught in a perpetual pursuit of an impossible synthesis, trying to become something we can never become without ceasing to be what we are. Consider how this plays out in everyday life. When you commit to an identity, when you say, I am a teacher, or I am a parent, or I am an artist, you are attempting to give yourself the stability and definition of the in itself. You want this identity to be true in the way a stone is a stone, with the same solidity and certainty, but you remain for itself, even as you claim to be in itself. You remain conscious that you are choosing this identity, that you could choose differently, that this role is not something you simply are, but something you must perpetually enact through continued choices. This is why all attempts at self-definition involve a kind of failure. We can never quite be what we claim to be, because being anything definite would require us to lose the gap of consciousness that makes us human. We can play at being whatever we choose, can commit ourselves to roles and identities, but we remain haunted by the awareness that we are playing, that our being does not coincide with these roles in the way things coincide with their nature. The for itself and the in itself represent two poles of being that can never be unified. We exist as for itself, as consciousness that is nothing but awareness and freedom, yet we are constantly drawn toward the solidity and fullness of the in itself. We want to fill the gap in our being, to achieve completion, to become something rather than remain the nothing that we are. But this nothing is our freedom, and to lose it would be to lose ourselves. Sartre suggests that much of human behavior can be understood as the futile attempt to synthesize these two modes of being. We pursue projects that promise to give us the fullness of things while preserving our freedom. We seek recognition from others that would confirm our being without eliminating our transcendence. We try to create fixed meanings that would anchor our existence without constraining our possibilities. And all of these projects are doomed because they aim at an impossible synthesis, a being that would be both conscious and thing, both free and determined, both nothing and something. The stone remains in the field, massive in its self-identity, complete in its indifference, and we remain separate from it by an unbridgeable gap, conscious of ourselves and our incompleteness, free in our nothingness, perpetually failing to achieve the fullness we desire, yet unable to stop desiring it, caught between two modes of being that can never become one. Condemned to be free. There exists a peculiar form of imprisonment that has no walls, no chains, no guards, standing watch. It is a confinement from which there is no escape and no parole, yet it is not imposed by any external authority. We carry this prison within the very structure of our being, and its name is freedom. Sartre captured this paradox in a phrase that has echoed through philosophy ever since: we are condemned to be free. The word condemned strikes an ominous note. We associate it with punishment. with sentences handed down by courts, with fates imposed against our will. To be condemned is to be trapped, limited, forced into a condition we would not choose. Yet Sartre uses this word to describe freedom itself, suggesting that our liberty is not a gift we celebrate, but a burden we cannot set down, a sentence we must serve simply by virtue of being human. Consider what it means to be condemned in the ordinary sense. A prisoner receives a sentence for a crime, a specific term to be served under defined conditions. When the sentence is complete, the prisoner is released, and the condemnation ends. But the condemnation to freedom has no such endpoint. It begins the moment we become conscious and continues until consciousness ceases. We cannot serve our time and be released. We cannot appeal to a higher authority to overturn the sentence. We are simply free, and this freedom is not something we chose or can refuse. This is the first paradox. We did not choose to be free. We find ourselves thrown into existence as beings who must choose, but we never chose to be choosers. We did not select human consciousness as our mode of being. We simply woke up one day to discover that we are creatures for whom choice is not optional but constitutive. We are free whether we want to be or not, and there is no authority to whom we can return this unwanted gift. Think about the implications of this involuntary freedom. You wake each morning and face the necessity of choosing how to live this day. You must decide what to do, how to be, what meaning to assign to your circumstances. Even refusing to choose is a choice. Even drifting passively through life is a way of choosing to drift. There is no escape into pure determination, no way to become a thing that simply follows its nature without the burden of decision. You are condemned to choose, and this condemnation cannot be appealed. The condemnation extends beyond individual choices to encompass our very being. We are condemned to create ourselves without a blueprint, to define our essence through our existence, to make something of ourselves without any assurance that what we make is what we should make. There is no cosmic instruction manual, no divine plan we are meant to fulfill, no true self waiting to be discovered. There is only the perpetual necessity of choosing what to become and the full weight of responsibility for whatever we choose. This freedom is absolute in a way that can be difficult to grasp. Sartre insists that even in the most constrained circumstances, even when external options are severely limited, we remain free in how we interpret and respond to our situation. The prisoner in chains is still free to choose defiance or resignation, to maintain dignity or surrender it, to find meaning in suffering or to despair. The slave cannot choose to be free in the external sense, but remains free in the internal stance taken toward enslavement. Even under torture, even facing death, consciousness retains the freedom to choose its response to what cannot be changed. But this absolute freedom does not make us omnipotent. We are free within a situation we did not choose. We are born into a particular body, a particular historical moment, a particular set of circumstances that limit the concrete options available to us. Our freedom is always situated, always exercised within constraints we cannot entirely control. Yet these constraints do not eliminate freedom. They establish the situation within which freedom must operate, the facticity against which our transcendence pushes, the given conditions we must interpret and respond to through our choices. The weight of this freedom manifests as anguish. We have already explored this anguish, but it takes on new dimensions when we recognize that freedom is not optional. If we could choose to be free or not free, we might have some refuge. We could decide when to accept responsibility and when to surrender it. But because we are condemned to freedom, because we cannot escape or refuse it, the anguish becomes inescapable. We are perpetually facing the abyss of possibility, perpetually responsible for creating ourselves, perpetually without foundation or guarantee. Most of us respond to this condemnation by attempting to deny it. We pretend we are less free than we are. We claim that circumstances determine our choices, that our nature constrains our possibilities, that we are simply following the path laid out for us by genes or upbringing or social expectations. These are all forms of bad faith, attempts to escape the condemnation to freedom by pretending we are things rather than consciousness, determined rather than free, following necessity rather than choosing. But even these attempts at escape are exercises of freedom. The person who claims they had no choice is choosing to interpret their situation as choiceless. The one who insists they are simply following their nature is choosing to identify with certain patterns and treat them as determinative. The flight from freedom is itself a free choice, and this means we can never truly escape the condemnation. We can lie to ourselves about it, we can hide from it, we can pretend it does not exist, but we remain condemned to be free even in our attempts to deny our freedom. Sartre suggests that this condemnation is the fundamental fact of human existence. We are not beings who happen to have freedom as one attribute among others. We are freedom itself in the sense that our mode of being is to exist without predetermined essence, to be nothing but the choices we make and the projects we pursue. To be human is to be condemned to freedom, to carry this burden that we did not ask for and cannot refuse, to live perpetually in the gap between what we have been and what we might become. There is no redemption from this sentence. We will carry the weight of freedom until consciousness ceases. We will face the necessity of choosing until there is no one left to choose. We will bear responsibility for creating ourselves until the self we are creating ceases to exist. This is the condemnation, not that we are punished for some crime, but that we are sentenced to freedom itself, forced to be the authors of our lives without any guarantee that we are writing well. Yet within this condemnation lies the possibility of authenticity. If we accept that we are condemned to freedom, if we stop fleeing from this reality into various forms of self-deception, we might live more honestly with our condition. We might acknowledge the weight we carry, rather than pretending it does not exist. We might accept responsibility, rather than seeking excuses. We might embrace the freedom that terrifies us, rather than denying it exists. The condemnation remains. The sentence continues, and in every moment we are free whether we acknowledge this freedom or deny it, whether we embrace it or flee from it, whether we accept the burden or attempt to transfer it to forces beyond our control. Authenticity in a world of masks. There is a performance we all give, a daily theater in which we play roles we have partly chosen and partly inherited. We wake and put on the costume appropriate to our function. We speak the lines expected of someone in our position. We move through the world enacting a version of ourselves that others can recognize, categorize, and respond to predictably. But beneath this performance, there remains a question that occasionally surfaces in quiet moments. Is this who I truly am, or am I merely playing at being myself? Sartre approached the concept of authenticity with suspicion toward any simple answer. He recognized that we cannot simply strip away our roles and discover some pure essential self waiting beneath the masks. There is no true self hidden behind the performance, because we are not things with fixed essences, but consciousness perpetually creating itself through choices and commitments. Authenticity cannot be a matter of discovering who we really are. It must be something else entirely. The inauthentic person lives in bad faith, pretending to be what they are in the mode of not being it. They identify completely with their role, treating it as though it were a fixed essence rather than a pattern of choices they continue to make. The waiter believes he is a waiter in the same way a stone is a stone. The coward believes cowardice is simply their nature rather than a pattern they have created and could change. These people are fleeing from the recognition of their freedom, from the weight of acknowledging that they are choosing to be what they claim to simply be. But authenticity is not the opposite of this flight. It is not a matter of refusing all roles or living without any stable identity. We must play roles to exist in the social world. We must adopt patterns of behavior to have any coherent life at all. The authentic person differs from the inauthentic, not by refusing roles, but by maintaining awareness that these roles are chosen, that they could be otherwise, that no role exhausts the freedom that chooses it. Think about what this means in practice. The authentic teacher does not pretend that teaching is simply their nature, something they could not help but be. They recognize that they have chosen this role and continue to choose it through repeated commitment. They understand that this identity is something they maintain rather than something they simply are. And in this understanding, they preserve the gap between themselves and their role, the distance that allows freedom to remain alive even within stable patterns of behavior. Authenticity requires living with the recognition of our freedom without fleeing from it into false necessities. It means acknowledging that we are responsible for what we become, that we cannot blame our circumstances or our nature or our past for who we are. It involves accepting the weight of this responsibility without seeking refuge in the lie that we had no choice, that we were simply following our essence, that forces beyond our control determined our path. This acceptance is not comfortable. It means giving up the consolations that bad faith offers, the relief of pretending we are less free than we are. It means living with perpetual uncertainty about whether we are choosing correctly, since there is no external standard we can appeal to for validation. It means bearing the full weight of authorship for our lives, knowing that what we make of ourselves is our responsibility alone. Yet there is also a kind of dignity in this way of living. The authentic person does not hide behind excuses or claim to be merely following necessity. They stand openly as the author of their choices, accepting that they are creating themselves rather than discovering themselves. They live without the false security of believing they have found their true nature, but also without the self-deception that comes from pretending to be something fixed and final. Sartre suggests that authenticity involves a particular relationship to anguish. Rather than fleeing from the anguish that comes with recognizing our freedom, the authentic person acknowledges it. They do not seek ways to numb or avoid this discomfort, but accept it as the price of living honestly with the human condition. They recognize that anguish is not a problem to be solved, but a fundamental feature of existing as freedom. This does not mean living in perpetual torment. It means integrating the recognition of freedom into one's way of being, living with awareness that one is choosing rather than pretending choice has been eliminated. The authentic person can commit deeply to projects and relationships while maintaining awareness that these commitments are chosen and could be otherwise. They can build stable patterns of living while understanding that these patterns do not constitute a fixed nature. Perhaps authenticity is less a state to be achieved than a perpetual task, a way of relating to oneself that must be renewed in each moment. We are always tempted to slip back into bad faith, to treat ourselves as things rather than freedom, to seek refuge in false necessities. Authenticity would be the ongoing effort to resist these temptations, to maintain the gap between ourselves and our roles, to acknowledge our freedom even when this acknowledgement brings anguish. The masks remain. We continue to play our parts in the social theater. But authentic existence differs from inauthentic by the awareness that we are wearing masks rather than faces, playing roles rather than being roles, choosing patterns rather than following nature. And in this awareness, freedom persists even within the structures we build to organize our lives. The original choice. There is a moment buried in the prehistory of your consciousness, a moment you cannot remember, but which colors everything you perceive and value. It is not a single decision made at a specific time, but rather a fundamental orientation toward existence that was established before you became capable of reflecting on your choices. Sartre called this the original choice, and he believed it shapes the entire trajectory of your being without your ever having consciously selected it. This original choice is not like choosing coffee over tea or selecting one career path instead of another. It is deeper and more pervasive, a way of taking up existence itself, a stance toward the world that determines what you will find significant and what you will overlook, what you will value and what you will dismiss. It is the choice of who you will be at the most fundamental level, made before you understood that you were choosing, yet binding you to a particular mode of being. Think about how each person seems to inhabit a different world, even when they occupy the same physical space. Two people walk down the same street, yet one notices the architecture while the other sees only the crowds. One person enters a conversation seeking connection, while another seeks validation or escape. These differences are not merely matters of attention or interest. They flow from something deeper, from the fundamental way each person has chosen to relate to existence itself. Sartre suggests that we organize our entire world around this original choice. It determines what we perceive as possibilities and what appears as obstacles. It shapes our emotional responses, our values, our sense of what matters. Someone who has made the original choice to be fundamentally a victim will organize their entire experience around this framework, interpreting events as confirmations of their victimhood, selecting aspects of reality that support this self-understanding while overlooking evidence that contradicts it. But if this choice is made before conscious reflection, how can it be called a choice at all? This is the mystery at the heart of Sartre's concept. The original choice is not deliberated or consciously selected, yet it is not simply imposed by external forces. It emerges from the encounter between consciousness and the world, from the necessity of taking some stance toward existence. We do not choose to make an original choice, but we make it nonetheless, and it establishes the framework within which all our subsequent choices will unfold. Consider what this means for self-knowledge. Most of us believe we understand our own motivations and values. We think we know what we want and why we want it. But according to Sartre, our conscious desires and stated goals are surface manifestations of something deeper. Beneath them lies the original choice that determines what we will find desirable in the first place. We may consciously seek success or love or meaning, but the way we understand these things, the particular form they take in our lives, flows from the fundamental stance we have taken toward existence. This original choice is not fixed permanently. It can be changed, but only through what Sartre calls a radical conversion, a fundamental reorientation of one's entire being. This is not a matter of simply deciding to see things differently or adopting new beliefs. It requires a complete restructuring of how one relates to existence, a shift so profound that the world itself appears transformed. What was once visible becomes invisible. What was once important becomes trivial. The entire structure of meaning reorganizes itself around a new center. Such conversions are rare because the original choice defends itself. It shapes perception in ways that confirm its own validity. The person who has chosen to be fundamentally unlovable will interpret gestures of affection as pity or manipulation, will find evidence of their unlovability even in situations that might suggest otherwise. The original choice creates a self-reinforcing loop, a way of being that generates experiences confirming its own truth. Yet the possibility of conversion remains. In moments of crisis or profound disruption, the original choice may be called into question. The frameworks through which we organize experience may reveal themselves as frameworks rather than as simply the way things are. And in this recognition, the possibility opens for a different choice, a different way of taking up existence, a different fundamental orientation toward being. Sartre believed that understanding the original choice is essential for genuine self-knowledge. We cannot know ourselves merely by examining our conscious thoughts and feelings. We must excavate the deeper structure that determines what thoughts and feelings will arise, the fundamental project that gives shape to our entire way of being. This requires a kind of existential psychoanalysis, a method of tracing surface behaviors and desires back to their root in the original choice. The original choice remains largely invisible to us, precisely because we see through it rather than seeing it. It is the lens through which we perceive rather than something we perceive directly. Yet it determines the shape and color of everything we experience, the significance we assign to events, the possibilities we recognize and pursue. And until we become aware of this choice, we remain bound by it without knowing we are bound, living out a pattern we never consciously selected yet cannot escape without first recognizing it exists. Anguish as the vertigo of possibility. Stand at the edge of a cliff and look down into the emptiness below. Your body tenses instinctively, pulling back from the precipice. This physical reaction is fear, the recognition that you might fall, that the ground might crumble, that some external force might push you over the edge. But beneath this fear lies something stranger and more unsettling. You recognize that nothing prevents you from stepping forward. No physical barrier blocks your path. No external force compels you to stay safe. The possibility of leaping exists purely within your freedom, and this recognition produces a sensation distinct from fear. This is what Sartre calls anguish. Anguish is not fear of what the world might do to you. It is dread in the face of what you might do to yourself. It emerges when you recognize that your future is not determined, that you are not bound by any necessity to continue being who you have been. The person who is resolved to stop drinking experiences anguish not because they fear alcohol will somehow force itself upon them, but because they recognize their resolution has no power to bind their future choices. Tomorrow they will remain free to drink despite today's commitment, and this freedom appears as a vertiginous absence of guarantee. Think about what happens in moments of genuine decision. You stand before a significant choice, perhaps whether to end a relationship or change careers or make some commitment that will alter the course of your life. In this moment, you may experience a peculiar sensation, as though the ground beneath you has dissolved. No argument conclusively settles the matter. No authority can tell you definitively what to do. You are suspended over an abyss of possibility, free to choose in any direction, yet terrified by this very freedom. This is anguish in its purest form. It is the recognition that you are the foundation of your values, rather than your values being the foundation of your choices. When you choose, you do not simply select the option that aligns with pre-existing values. You create the values through the act of choosing. The person who chooses family over career is not merely following a value they already possessed. They are establishing through their choice that family matters more than career, and this establishment has no foundation outside the choice itself. Sartre illustrates this through the example of a military leader who must decide whether to send soldiers on a dangerous mission. The leader can consider probabilities, weigh costs and benefits, consult with advisors. But ultimately, the decision remains suspended over an abyss. No calculation definitively settles whether the mission is worth the lives it will cost. The leader must simply choose, and in choosing, they establish what is valuable rather than discovering it. The anguish comes from recognizing that this choice has no foundation outside itself, that they are alone with their freedom, that nothing guarantees they are choosing correctly. This anguish is fundamentally different from the anxiety or stress we often feel about decisions. Anxiety typically concerns outcomes, the fear that our choice will lead to undesirable consequences, but anguish concerns the very structure of choosing, the recognition that we are creating values rather than following them, that our choices have no foundation except our freedom. Even if we knew with certainty what consequences would follow from each option, anguish would remain because the question of which consequences are preferable has no answer outside the choice itself. Most of us flee from anguish. We pretend our values are given rather than created, determined by nature or culture or reason rather than established through our choices. We act as though our decisions follow necessarily from who we are, rather than creating who we are. We seek formulas and principles that will tell us what to do, hoping to escape the vertigo of pure freedom. All these strategies are forms of bad faith, attempts to avoid the recognition that we are alone with our choices, that no foundation supports us, that we are suspended over an abyss of possibility. Yet anguish occasionally breaks through these defenses. It appears in moments when our usual frameworks fail us, when we face decisions that cannot be resolved through calculation or appeal to authority. It emerges when we recognize that we have been choosing all along, that even our most automatic behaviors flow from commitments we have made and continue to make. It surfaces when we acknowledge that we could be otherwise, that nothing binds us to remain who we have been. Sartre suggests that anguish is the recognition of our condition rather than a pathology to be cured. It reveals the truth that we are free, that our choices create rather than follow values, that we are suspended over nothingness without foundation or guarantee. To live authentically would require acknowledging this anguish rather than fleeing from it, accepting that we are the groundless ground of our existence, that we choose without certainty or external validation. The vertigo remains. The abyss of possibility continues to open beneath every choice, and in recognizing this groundlessness, we encounter the fundamental structure of human freedom in its most undisguised and terrifying form. The impossibility of not choosing. There is a peculiar trap that closes around us the moment we become conscious. We might wish to remain neutral, to avoid committing ourselves, to keep all possibilities open without selecting any particular path. We might hope to defer decision, to wait for more information or greater certainty before acting. But even as we entertain these wishes, we are already caught. The trap has already sprung. Because in the very act of deferring, we have chosen. In refusing to commit, we have made a commitment. In trying not to decide, we have decided. This is perhaps the most inescapable aspect of human freedom. We cannot simply observe existence from some neutral vantage point outside it. We are always already engaged, always already taking a stance, always already making choices through our actions and inactions. The person who refuses to vote in an election has not abstained from political choice. They have chosen to let others decide, have taken a political stance through their refusal. The one who defers an important decision has not avoided choosing. They have chosen to let circumstances determine the outcome rather than actively shaping it. Sartre insists that we are always choosing, even when we believe we are not. The student who sits in the library, staring at an open book without reading, has chosen distraction over concentration. The person who remains in an unhappy relationship has chosen continuation over ending. The one who goes through their daily routine without reflection has chosen automaticity over conscious engagement. There is no position outside choice, no place to stand where we are not actively creating ourselves through what we do and what we fail to do. This impossibility of not choosing creates a particular form of responsibility. We cannot excuse ourselves by claiming we did nothing, because doing nothing is itself doing something. We cannot say we merely let events unfold, because allowing events to unfold is a way of choosing how to respond to them. We are implicated in whatever happens through our presence and our freedom, even when we believe we are remaining neutral or passive. Think about what this means for the common excuse that we were simply avoiding making a choice. The person who cannot decide between two job offers and lets the deadline pass has not avoided choosing. They have chosen to lose both opportunities. The one who refuses to take a stance on a moral issue has not remained neutral. They have chosen to let the existing situation continue unchallenged. Every moment of deferral is a moment of choice, every instance of hesitation a way of deciding. This extends even to the choice not to reflect on our choices. The person who lives unreflectively, who simply follows habit and social expectation without examining what they do or why, has not escaped choice. They have chosen unreflective conformity over conscious engagement. They have decided to let others and circumstances determine their path rather than actively creating it themselves. The very refusal to examine one's life is a fundamental choice about how to live. Sartre suggests that we often use the language of indecision to disguise choices we have already made, but do not want to acknowledge. When someone says they cannot decide what to do, they may be choosing to avoid the responsibility that would come with a clear decision. When they claim to be torn between options, they may be choosing to maintain a state of suspension that serves purposes they have not admitted to themselves. The discourse of indecision often masks a decision to avoid deciding, which is itself a form of deciding. The impossibility of not choosing means that we are always creating ourselves, always moving in some direction, always making something of our existence through what we do and what we leave undone. There is no pause button for human existence, no way to stop the clock while we figure out what we want to be. Life continues whether we choose actively or passively, and our way of being in each moment is a choice, even when we do not recognize it as such. This creates a peculiar urgency, because we cannot avoid choosing, because every moment is an exercise of freedom whether we acknowledge it or not. We are perpetually shaping our existence. The person who defers important decisions for years discovers that these years of deferral have themselves created a life, have established patterns and possibilities. Time does not wait for us to feel ready. We are always already in the middle of choosing, always already creating the person we are becoming. Perhaps the recognition of this impossibility is itself liberating. If we cannot avoid choosing, then we might as well choose consciously rather than unconsciously, actively rather than passively, with awareness rather than in denial. We might acknowledge that we are always already engaged, always already taking a stance, always already creating ourselves through every moment of existence, and in this acknowledgement, we might begin to choose with greater honesty about what we are doing. The trap remains closed. There is no escape from choosing, and in every moment of attempted neutrality, we discover that we have already chosen how to be. Freedom and situation. There is a tension that runs through every moment of human existence, a tension between two truths that seem impossible to reconcile. On one hand, we are absolutely free, condemned to choose in every moment who we will be and what we will make of ourselves. On the other hand, we find ourselves thrown into circumstances we did not select, born into a particular body, a particular historical moment, a particular web of relationships and social conditions that constrain what is possible for us. These two truths pull against each other, and the space between them is where we actually live. Sartre called this the relationship between freedom and situation. The situation is everything we did not choose but must now respond to. It is the facticity of our existence, the given conditions within which our freedom must operate. You did not choose your parents, your genetic inheritance, the year of your birth, the country you were born into, or the countless other factors that shape the possibilities available to you. These are simply the facts of your existence, the raw material with which you must work. Yet even these unchosen facts do not eliminate freedom. They establish the context within which freedom operates, but they do not determine how we will respond to this context. Two people born into identical circumstances might make radically different choices about what to do with these circumstances. One might accept limitations as defining boundaries while another might see them as obstacles to overcome. The situation provides the terrain, but freedom determines how we navigate it. Think about how a mountain presents itself differently depending on the projects of the person who encounters it. For the person who wishes to cross to the other side, the mountain is an obstacle, something that blocks their path and demands effort to overcome. For the mountain climber, it is an opportunity, something that calls forth their skills and provides meaning to their endeavor. For the person content to stay in the valley, it is simply a feature of the landscape, neither obstacle nor opportunity. The mountain itself has not changed, yet its meaning transforms according to the projects we bring to it. This is how situation and freedom interact. The situation provides certain objective features, certain facts that cannot be denied. But the meaning of these facts depends entirely on how we take them up, what projects we pursue in relation to them, how we choose to let them affect our possibilities. The same circumstance can be a crushing limitation for one person and a liberating challenge for another, depending on how they choose to interpret and respond to it. Sartre insists that we are always both free and situated. We cannot be free in some abstract, unlimited sense, as though we could simply wish ourselves into any condition we desire. Our freedom is always exercised within constraints, always working with given materials, always responding to circumstances we did not create. But neither are we simply determined by our situation, mere products of our circumstances with no ability to shape what we become. We are free within situation, and our freedom consists precisely in how we take up the facticity of our existence. Consider the person born into poverty. The poverty is a fact, an objective condition that shapes what opportunities are available and what challenges must be faced. But how this person responds to poverty remains free. One might accept it as a permanent limitation, letting it define the boundaries of possibility. Another might see it as something to escape, organizing their entire life around the project of achieving financial security. A third might embrace it as a rejection of materialist values, finding meaning in simplicity. The facticity of poverty remains constant, but its meaning shifts according to how freedom takes it up. This means that even our most constrained situations do not eliminate freedom. The prisoner cannot choose to walk out of the cell, but remains free to choose their attitude toward imprisonment, their response to guards, their way of organizing the limited options available. The person with a disability cannot choose to have a different body, but remains free to determine what this body means for them, how they will live with it, what projects they will pursue despite or because of it. Situation limits the concrete options available, but it does not eliminate the freedom to choose among whatever options remain. Yet situation is not merely an external constraint. Our situation also includes our past, the person we have already become through previous choices. We are free to choose what to do next, but we must choose from the position we have already established through past choices. The person who has spent years developing one set of skills cannot suddenly possess different skills simply by choosing to. They must work from where they are, taking into account what they have already made of themselves. This is why Sartre says, we are always both freedom and facticity. We are free, but our freedom is always exercised from within a situation that includes both external circumstances and the results of our own past choices. We are making ourselves, but we are making ourselves from materials we did not select, in circumstances we did not create, starting from a position we have inherited from our previous choices. Freedom and situation are not opposed, but intertwined, each defining the other, together constituting the complex reality of human existence. The gaze that turns us to objects. This transformation through the gaze of another is not merely psychological. It represents a shift in the structure of being itself. When you are alone, your body is transparent to you, a living instrument through which you engage with the world rather than something you observe. You do not experience your body as others experience it. You cannot see your own face as it appears to them, cannot observe your gestures from their perspective, cannot know directly what it is like to encounter yourself as an object in space. There exists a transformation so fundamental that it restructures reality itself in an instant. You are alone, perhaps doing something private, absorbed in your own world with no consciousness of how you appear from outside. You exist purely as perspective, as the point from which the world is observed and organized. Then suddenly, a sound, a presence, another person, and in that moment, everything inverts. You cease to be the center from which meaning radiates and become instead an object in someone else's field of perception, something that can be seen, judged, categorized, defined. But the other's gaze gives you access to this dimension of yourself that would otherwise remain hidden. Through their eyes, you discover that you exist not only for yourself, but also in yourself, as a thing with observable characteristics, a body that occupies space, a presence that can be described and evaluated according to criteria you did not establish. The other sees you as tall or short, attractive or plain, threatening or harmless, and these judgments create a version of you that exists in their consciousness, a self you cannot directly access or control. Think about what happens when you become aware of being watched in a moment you considered private. You were absorbed in some action, completely unself-conscious, existing purely as the subject of your experience. But the moment you realize someone is watching, you experience shame or embarrassment or self-consciousness. These emotions arise not from anything you have done wrong, but from the recognition that you now exist for the other as an object, that they possess a perspective on you that escapes your control, that they are making you into something you did not choose to be. This objectification through the gaze contains a peculiar violence. The other freezes you in their perception, transforms your freedom into an observable trait, makes you into something that can be known and labeled. When they see you as shy, they are not merely noting a behavior, but creating a fixed identity that may not correspond to how you experience yourself. When they judge you as arrogant, they reduce the complex flow of your consciousness to a single category that makes you comprehensible to them, but does not capture the reality of your experience. Sartre illustrates this through the image of someone caught looking through a keyhole. While absorbed in spying, the person exists purely as consciousness, as the perspective from which the scene beyond the door is observed, but then footsteps behind them, and suddenly they become the one observed, the spy caught in the shameful act. In this instant, their entire existence reorganizes around the other's gaze. They are no longer pure subject but degraded object, defined by an action that now appears shameful because it is seen from outside. The power of the gaze lies precisely in its ability to define us in ways we cannot fully resist. We may protest the other's judgment, may insist they have misunderstood us, may attempt to change their perception through explanation or performance. But we cannot eliminate their perspective or force them to see us as we see ourselves. Their consciousness remains free, just as ours does, and this means they will make of us whatever their own projects and needs lead them to make. Yet we need this gaze even as we resent its power over us. Without other consciousnesses to reflect us back to ourselves, we would have no identity in the social world, no confirmation that we exist beyond our own immediate experience. We depend on others to give us an objective existence, to transform us from pure interiority into beings who appear in the world, who can be recognized and acknowledged. The gaze that objectifies us also validates our existence in a dimension we cannot access alone. This creates a perpetual tension in all human relationships. We seek recognition from others, yet fear being reduced to objects in their perception. We want them to see us truly, yet know they can only see us from their own perspective, which necessarily differs from ours. We need their gaze to confirm our existence, yet suffer under its power to define us in ways that feel alien to our own experience. And because we cannot control how they see us, we remain perpetually vulnerable to being misrecognized, misunderstood, transformed into something we do not recognize as ourselves. The gaze of the other will continue to find us, to transform us from subjects into objects, to give us an identity in the world while threatening the freedom that constitutes our being. And in this perpetual exposure to perspectives we cannot control, we discover both the necessity and the terror of existing in a world with other consciousnesses. Self-deception as escape. There is a lie we tell that requires no one else to believe it. It needs no audience, no witness, no external validation. Yet it is perhaps the most elaborate deception of all, because the person who tells it must simultaneously be the one who believes it, and the one who knows it is false. This is the peculiar structure of self-deception, and Sartre recognized it as one of the fundamental patterns through which we flee from the recognition of our freedom. Self-deception is not simple ignorance. The person who does not know something cannot be accused of deceiving themselves about it. Nor is it the straightforward lie we tell others, where we know the truth, but deliberately conceal it. Self-deception requires something more intricate. We must know the truth at some level, yet arrange our consciousness so that we do not have to acknowledge what we know. We must be both the deceiver who knows and the deceived who does not, existing in a state of split awareness that seems impossible, yet proves remarkably common. Consider the person who claims they are not jealous while exhibiting all the behaviors of jealousy. They question their partner obsessively, monitor their movements, interpret innocent actions as suspicious. When confronted, they insist they are simply being reasonable, simply asking legitimate questions, simply concerned about honesty in the relationship. They are not jealous because they have defined jealousy as an irrational emotion they would never experience. Yet somewhere within them, they know exactly what they are feeling. They recognize the jealousy even as they construct elaborate defenses against acknowledging it. This is the mechanism of self-deception. We know something about ourselves that we find unbearable to admit, so we create alternative explanations that allow us to avoid the recognition. The coward knows they acted from fear, but tells themselves they were being prudent. The cruel person knows they enjoy causing pain, but convinces themselves they are simply being honest or tough or appropriately severe. The one who abandons their principles knows they have compromised but persuades themselves that circumstances left them no choice. Sartre saw self-deception as a flight from anguish. When we recognize our freedom fully, when we acknowledge that we are choosing who we are and what we become, we face the weight of responsibility without excuse or refuge. This weight provokes anguish, and self-deception offers temporary escape. By pretending we are not free, by claiming we are simply following our nature or responding to circumstances, we attempt to lighten the burden of responsibility. But self-deception can never fully succeed because consciousness cannot hide from itself completely. We remain aware at some level of what we are trying to avoid knowing. The jealous person recognizes their jealousy in the very moment of denying it. The coward knows their cowardice even as they construct justifications. The evidence of what we are trying to hide keeps surfacing, requiring constant vigilance to maintain the deception. Think about the energy required to sustain self-deception. We must continuously police our own thoughts, redirecting attention away from uncomfortable recognitions, constructing elaborate narratives that explain away what we do not wish to see. We must interpret our actions in ways that preserve the image we want to maintain, selectively remembering facts that support our self-conception while forgetting those that challenge it. The mind becomes a battleground where part of us struggles to reveal what another part desperately tries to conceal. This internal division creates a peculiar fragmentation. We are no longer unified but split between the self that knows and the self that pretends not to know, between the truth we recognize and the lie we tell ourselves. This fragmentation prevents genuine self-knowledge because we cannot know ourselves honestly while simultaneously deceiving ourselves about what we know. We exist in a state of perpetual bad faith, aware yet unaware, knowing yet denying, conscious yet in flight from consciousness. Sartre suggests that self-deception often involves treating ourselves as objects rather than as freedom. We claim that we cannot help being the way we are, that our actions flow necessarily from our nature or our circumstances. We say this is just who I am, as though we possessed a fixed essence that determined our behavior. This transforms us into things, into beings that simply are what they are, without the gap of consciousness that would allow us to be otherwise. And in this transformation, we temporarily escape the recognition that we are choosing to be what we claim to simply be. Yet the escape is never complete. The freedom we are trying to deny continues to manifest in our very attempts to deny it. The person who claims they had no choice is choosing to interpret their situation as choiceless. The one who insists they are simply following their nature is choosing to identify with certain patterns and treat them as determinative. Self-deception itself is an exercise of the freedom it attempts to conceal, and this means it can never fully accomplish its aim. Perhaps the only way to move beyond self-deception is to acknowledge it, to recognize the lies we have been telling ourselves and the reasons we needed to tell them. This requires courage because it means facing directly what we have been avoiding, accepting responsibility we have been deflecting, acknowledging freedom we have been denying. But in this recognition, we might begin to live with greater honesty, accepting ourselves as we are rather than as we wish to pretend to be. The mechanisms of self-deception remain available, waiting for the next moment when truth becomes unbearable, and we need temporary refuge in lies we tell ourselves. The project of being God. There is a desire that moves beneath the surface of almost every human endeavor, a longing so fundamental that we rarely name it directly. We pursue success, seek love, accumulate possessions, build reputations, create works that might outlast us. But beneath these particular goals lies something deeper, a wish that unifies all our projects even as it remains impossible to fulfill. Sartre identified this hidden desire with disturbing clarity. We want to be God. This is not a religious claim. Sartre means something specific by the desire to be God, something that has nothing to do with worship or divinity in the conventional sense. To be God would be to achieve a synthesis that human consciousness perpetually seeks, yet can never attain. It would be to possess the fullness and self-identity of a thing while retaining the consciousness and freedom that makes us human. It would be to become being in itself for itself, an impossible combination of two modes of existence that can never be unified. Think about what this synthesis would mean. As consciousness, we exist in perpetual incompleteness. We are not what we have been, since the past is fixed, and we are free to transcend it. We are not yet what we will be, since the future remains open and undetermined. We are not even what we are in the present moment, since we are always at a distance from ourselves, aware of ourselves rather than coinciding with ourselves. This gap, this permanent incompleteness, defines human consciousness, but also creates a hunger for the fullness we lack. The in itself, by contrast, possesses absolute completeness. A stone is simply what it is, with no gap between its being and itself. It does not suffer from incompleteness or long for something it lacks. It exists with total self-identity, massive in its thinghood, coinciding perfectly with what it is. But it lacks consciousness. It has no awareness of itself, no freedom to transcend what it is, no capacity to project itself toward future possibilities. We want both. We want the consciousness and freedom that makes us human, but we also want the completeness and self-identity that belongs to things. We want to be something definite, something we could point to and say, "This is what I am," yet we also want to remain free to be otherwise. We want to achieve a fixed identity without losing the transcendence that allows us to go beyond whatever we have been. We want to be causa sui, the cause of ourselves, beings who create their own essence while possessing that essence with the necessity of things. This is what Sartre means by the desire to be God. God, in traditional theology, is the being who exists necessarily, who is the foundation of his own being, who possesses both perfect self-identity and perfect freedom. God is what he chooses to be, yet what he chooses to be is also what he necessarily is. He synthesizes the for itself and the in itself, combining consciousness with thinghood, freedom with necessity, transcendence with fullness. And this is precisely what we seek in all our projects, even when we do not recognize this seeking for what it is. Consider how this desire manifests in everyday life. When we seek recognition from others, we are trying to gain an objective identity that would confirm we are something definite while preserving our freedom to transcend this identity. When we pursue accomplishments, we are attempting to create a self that would exist with the permanence of things while remaining the free consciousness that created it. When we fall in love, we seek to be chosen freely by another, yet to possess their love with the necessity of an unchangeable fact. All these projects aim at achieving the impossible synthesis. We want to fix our being without losing our freedom. We want to become something complete without ceasing to be consciousness. We want to possess ourselves the way objects possess themselves, with total self-identity and no internal division, yet we also want to remain the beings who possess this possession, the consciousness that is aware of what it is. But this synthesis can never be achieved. The moment we achieved the fullness and self-identity we seek, we would cease to be consciousness. We would become things, objects that simply are what they are without the gap of awareness. And so we are caught in a perpetual pursuit of something that becomes impossible. The moment we approach it, we cannot be both for itself and in itself. We cannot combine freedom with necessity, consciousness with thinghood, transcendence with completion. Sartre suggests that recognizing this impossibility might free us from the futile pursuit. If we acknowledge that we are seeking something that cannot be achieved, we might stop organizing our lives around this unattainable goal. We might accept our incompleteness rather than fleeing from it. Embrace our lack of fixed identity rather than desperately trying to create one. We might live as the freedom we are rather than trying to become the thing we can never be. Yet the desire persists. It seems built into the structure of human consciousness, a longing that continues even after we recognize its impossibility. We know we cannot be God, yet we continue to organize our projects as though we could achieve the synthesis we seek. And perhaps this futile striving is simply part of what it means to be human, to exist as beings who desire what their very structure makes impossible. The project continues, generation after generation, each person seeking in their own way to achieve the impossible synthesis, to become both free and complete, conscious and self-identical, transcendent and fixed, and the impossibility remains unchanged, waiting at the end of every project that aimed at becoming God. Love is a doomed enterprise. There is a paradox at the heart of romantic love, a contradiction so fundamental that it haunts every attempt at genuine connection. We fall in love, seeking to possess another person completely, to capture their freedom and make it ours, to be chosen by them in a way that guarantees they will continue choosing us. Yet the very thing we desire, their free choice of us, is precisely what we seek to eliminate through the security and permanence we crave. We want them to choose us freely, yet we want this choice to be irreversible, binding, as necessary as the laws of nature. Sartre saw love as an impossible project, doomed from its inception by contradictory desires that can never be reconciled. When we love someone, we do not merely want their company or their affection or their loyalty. We want something far more ambitious and far more troubling. We want to possess their consciousness itself, to become the foundation of their world, to be chosen by their freedom in a way that would transform their freedom into something fixed and permanent. Think about what happens in the early stages of love. The beloved's attention feels like validation of our entire existence. When they look at us, we experience ourselves as worthy of being seen. When they choose to spend time with us, we feel confirmed in our value. Their consciousness becomes a mirror in which we hope to see ourselves as lovable, desirable, essential. We are seeking recognition. But recognition of a particular kind. We want them to see us as the irreplaceable center of their world, the one person without whom their existence would lose meaning. But here emerges the first contradiction. We want them to choose us freely, because a forced or coerced choice would not validate us in the way we need. If they loved us only out of obligation or fear or manipulation, this would not satisfy our desire for recognition. We need to know that they could have chosen otherwise, yet chose us, that their freedom acknowledged our value and committed itself to us among all possible options. The freedom of their choice is essential to what makes the choice meaningful. Yet we also want some guarantee that they will continue to choose us. We want their love to be permanent, stable, something we can count on without constant anxiety about whether it might disappear. We seek commitment, promises, vows that would bind their future choices and provide security against the possibility of abandonment. But these commitments attempt to eliminate the very freedom that made their original choice meaningful. We are trying to transform a free choice into a necessity, to make permanent what can only be meaningful as long as it remains free. This contradiction plays out in the perpetual insecurity of love. No matter how often the beloved declares their love, no matter how many promises they make, we remain aware that they are free to change their mind. Their consciousness escapes our control. We cannot force them to continue loving us. We cannot eliminate the possibility that tomorrow they might see us differently, might discover someone else more appealing, might simply cease to find value in what we offer. And this awareness creates anxiety that no amount of reassurance can permanently dispel. Sartre suggests that we respond to this anxiety by attempting to capture the beloved's freedom. We seek to make ourselves indispensable to them, to become so essential to their happiness that they could not imagine existing without us. We try to occupy their consciousness completely, to be present in their thoughts at every moment, to eliminate any space where they might exist independently of us. We become jealous of their other relationships, their separate interests, anything that suggests they have an existence that does not center entirely on us. But this project of possession is self-defeating. The more we try to capture their freedom, the more we transform their love into something that is no longer love. If we succeeded in making them completely dependent on us, if we eliminated all possibility of their choosing otherwise, they would no longer be freely choosing us at all. They would be bound to us by necessity or habit or fear of being alone, and this binding would destroy precisely what we sought through love, the validation that comes from being freely chosen by another consciousness. Love also fails from another direction. Even as we seek to possess the beloved's consciousness, we resist being possessed by them. We want to be chosen, but we do not want to surrender our own freedom in being chosen. We want them to make us the center of their world, but we resist becoming merely an object in their consciousness. We flee from their attempt to possess us, even as we attempt to possess them. Both lovers seek the same impossible synthesis to be subject for themselves while becoming object for the other, to possess the other's freedom while retaining their own. What makes this dynamic tragic is not that we love badly or insufficiently. It is that the structure of love itself contains contradictions that cannot be resolved. We are seeking something that our very nature as free consciousnesses makes impossible. We want to be God for the other and to make them God for us, to achieve through love the impossible synthesis of freedom and necessity that we cannot achieve alone. Perhaps acknowledging this impossibility might transform how we approach love. If we accept that we cannot possess another consciousness, cannot guarantee their continued choice, cannot eliminate the fundamental freedom that makes them other than us, we might love with less desperation and more generosity. We might appreciate the free gift of another's presence without demanding it become permanent. We might accept love as something perpetually renewed rather than something once achieved and then possessed. But the desire for possession persists, and with it the anxiety that what is freely given might be freely withdrawn. Sadism, masochism, and recognition. There exist twisted paths toward recognition, detours through pain and domination that reveal something disturbing about the structure of human relationships. When the straightforward pursuit of love fails, when we cannot possess another's consciousness through mutual desire, other strategies emerge. Some seek to reduce the other to pure object through sadism. Others attempt to escape their own freedom by becoming object for the other through masochism. Both represent desperate attempts to resolve the fundamental problem of human connection, and both are destined to fail. The sadist recognizes that the other's consciousness escapes them, that they cannot possess the beloved's freedom through love. So they attempt a different strategy. They will destroy the other's subjectivity entirely, reducing them to pure flesh, pure object, something that can be possessed completely because it no longer possesses itself. Through inflicting pain, through domination, through forcing the other into positions of degradation, the sadist hopes to eliminate the troubling freedom that makes the other ultimately unpossessable. But this project contains its own contradiction. The sadist wants to possess the other's consciousness, yet they are working to destroy that consciousness. They want recognition from the other, yet they are attempting to reduce the other to an object that can no longer grant recognition. The moment they succeed in objectifying the other completely, the other ceases to be capable of providing what the sadist actually seeks. An object cannot recognize. A thing cannot validate. The sadist is working to eliminate the very freedom whose acknowledgement they desire. Moreover, the other's consciousness proves remarkably resilient. Even under torture, even in positions of complete physical domination, consciousness maintains the capacity to withdraw, to refuse, to remain separate. The victim can look at the torturer with contempt, can maintain an inner dignity that escapes the torturer's control, can choose how to interpret and respond to the suffering being inflicted. And in this residual freedom, the sadist's project fails. They cannot reduce the other to pure object because consciousness always maintains a distance from whatever is done to it. The masochist attempts the opposite path. Rather than trying to possess the other's consciousness, they try to escape their own. They offer themselves as pure object to the other, attempting to lose themselves in being a thing for the other's desire or domination. They seek to become flesh, body, matter without consciousness, thereby escaping the weight of freedom and the anxiety of being responsible for themselves. But this project fails for similar reasons. The masochist remains conscious even while attempting to lose consciousness. They are aware of their submission, aware that they are choosing to be dominated, aware that they could choose otherwise. The very structure of masochism requires consciousness, requires the choice to submit, requires the freedom that is supposedly being surrendered. The masochist cannot become pure object, because to become pure object would require ceasing to be the consciousness that chooses masochism. What Sartre reveals through analyzing these extreme forms is something about all human relationships. We are caught in a perpetual tension between wanting to possess the other's consciousness and wanting to be possessed by it, between trying to reduce the other to object and trying to become object ourselves. These desires are contradictory, yet both flow from the same fundamental problem. We are separate consciousnesses who need each other for recognition, yet can never fully possess or be possessed by each other. Neither sadism nor masochism resolves this tension because both attempt to eliminate one pole of the relationship. The sadist tries to eliminate the other's subjectivity. The masochist tries to eliminate their own. But human relationships require both subjectivity and objectivity, both freedom and facticity, both the one who recognizes and the one who is recognized. Destroying either pole destroys the possibility of genuine connection. These patterns appear not only in their extreme forms but also in subtler ways throughout ordinary relationships. The person who seeks total control over their partner, who monitors their movements and dictates their choices, is attempting a mild form of sadism, trying to reduce the other's freedom to something manageable and possessed. The person who completely subordinates themselves to their partner's desires, who has no independent existence or preferences, is enacting a mild masochism, trying to escape the burden of their own freedom by becoming pure object for the other. Both strategies fail because both attempt to escape the fundamental structure of human relationships. We are beings who exist both for ourselves and for others, both as subjects and as objects, both as freedom and as facticity. We cannot eliminate any of these dimensions without destroying the very possibility of relationship. And so we remain suspended in the tension between possession and being possessed, between objectifying and being objectified, between seeking recognition and fleeing from the weight of being recognized. Perhaps the only way beyond these destructive patterns is to acknowledge the impossibility of full possession, to accept that the other will always escape us and we will always escape them, to live within the tension rather than trying to eliminate it. But this acceptance requires giving up the dream of complete union, of perfect recognition, of finally resolving the separation between consciousnesses, and that dream proves difficult to surrender. The futility of desire. There is a hunger that underlies every human longing, a desire that moves beneath all our particular wants and needs. We desire objects, we desire experiences, we desire other people, yet none of these surface desires ever truly satisfies us. We obtain what we thought we wanted, only to discover the satisfaction evaporates almost immediately. We find ourselves desiring again, pursuing the next thing, convinced that this time fulfillment will be permanent. But Sartre suggests that this perpetual dissatisfaction is not accidental. It flows from the very structure of desire itself. Desire, in its most fundamental form, is the expression of a lack. We desire precisely what we do not have, what we are not, what remains at a distance from us. The moment we possess the object of desire, the moment it becomes ours, it ceases to be what we desired. We wanted it as something we lacked, as something outside ourselves that promised to complete us. But once possessed, it is no longer outside, no longer promising, no longer capable of filling the void it was supposed to fill. Think about what happens when you finally obtain something you have wanted for a long time. Perhaps it is an object you saved money to purchase, or a position you worked years to achieve, or a relationship you pursued with determination. In the moment of acquisition, there may be a brief flash of satisfaction. But this satisfaction quickly fades, and what remains is not the fullness you expected, but simply another situation you now inhabit, another fact about your life that has ceased to feel special or transformative. This is because desire is oriented toward possibility rather than actuality. When the object is still absent, it exists in your imagination as pure potential, as something that might transform your existence if only you could obtain it. Your consciousness projects onto this absent object all manner of qualities and promises. It becomes not merely the thing itself, but a symbol of fulfillment, completion, happiness. But the moment it becomes actual, the moment it transitions from possibility to fact, it loses this symbolic quality and appears as merely what it is, a thing among other things, incapable of delivering the existential transformation you unconsciously expected from it. Sartre suggests that what we truly desire is impossible. We desire to become in itself for itself, to achieve the synthesis of consciousness and thing, to fill the gap in our being and become complete. Every particular desire is ultimately a displaced expression of this fundamental and impossible desire. We think we want this person or this object or this experience, but what we actually want is to use them to achieve a completeness that our structure as consciousness makes impossible to attain. This is why desire is perpetually renewed. We obtain what we thought we wanted, discover it does not satisfy us, and immediately transfer our desire to something else. The object changes, but the structure remains the same. We are always seeking to fill a void that cannot be filled, to achieve a completion that would require us to cease being conscious, to possess ourselves in a way that consciousness cannot possess itself. Consider sexual desire as a particularly clear example. In the moment of desire, the other's body appears as something that promises fulfillment. We imagine that possession of this body will satisfy something essential in us, but the physical union, even when fully achieved, leaves something unsatisfied. We wanted to possess the other's consciousness through possessing their body, to achieve union at a level that physical contact cannot reach. The body becomes merely flesh, and the consciousness we were seeking to capture remains as separate and elusive as before. This futility appears in all forms of desire, not only the explicitly sexual. The person who desires wealth imagines that money will provide security or freedom or happiness. But wealth once obtained proves to be merely resources that must now be managed, that create their own anxieties and limitations. The person who desires fame imagines it will provide recognition and validation. But fame, once achieved, proves to be a public identity that feels alien, a projection by others that does not correspond to one's inner experience. What makes desire futile is not that we choose the wrong objects. It is that we are seeking through objects something that objects cannot provide. We are trying to use things in the world to solve a problem that is structural to consciousness itself. We are incomplete because we are for itself, because we exist as a gap between what we have been and what we might become. And no accumulation of possessions, no achievement of goals, no acquisition of relationships can fill this gap, because the gap is not an absence of something but the very structure of conscious existence. Perhaps recognizing this futility might free us from the tyranny of desire. If we acknowledge that desire cannot ultimately satisfy, that we are seeking through objects what they cannot provide, we might pursue things with less desperation and more playfulness. We might enjoy what we obtain without expecting it to transform our existence. We might accept our incompleteness rather than fleeing from it into the perpetual pursuit of the next thing that promises but cannot deliver fulfillment. But the structure of desire persists, and with it the perpetual disappointment that accompanies every satisfaction. Being in Nothingness, there is a title that appears deceptively simple, two words connected by a conjunction suggesting a relationship between opposites, being and nothingness. Yet within this pairing lies an entire philosophy of human existence, a vision of consciousness as a peculiar kind of nothing that exists in the midst of being, a gap that introduces negation into a world that would otherwise be pure positivity. What could it mean to say that consciousness is nothingness? Things are. A rock exists with full density, a tree occupies space, water flows with substance. These things possess being in the straightforward sense. They are present, material, actual. But consciousness is not like these things. It is not a substance that occupies space or possesses properties in the way objects possess properties. It is rather a gap, an opening, a distance that separates itself from whatever it is conscious of. When you perceive a tree, your consciousness is not another thing alongside the tree, not another object occupying a different position in space. Your consciousness is the perspective from which the tree appears, the opening through which the tree becomes present. And this opening is itself nothing. It has no color, no shape, no substance. It is pure transparency, pure awareness, pure presence to what is other than itself. Consciousness is nothingness in the sense that it is not anything, not any being, but rather the gap through which being appears. This nothingness is not simple absence. It is an active negation, a power to separate itself from what it encounters. When you see the tree, you are not the tree. There is a distance between your consciousness and the object of consciousness, and this distance is created by consciousness itself. Consciousness introduces negation into the world, the capacity to say this is not that, I am not what I perceive, I am not what I have been, I am not yet what I will become. Think about what this means for self-awareness. When you become conscious of yourself, you are separating yourself from yourself, creating a gap between the self that is aware and the self that is the object of awareness. You are not coinciding with yourself, but standing at a distance from yourself, observing yourself as though you were another. This internal separation is the structure of consciousness itself. You cannot be conscious without this gap, without this nothingness that opens space between being and itself. Sartre sees human reality as the introduction of nothingness into being. The world of things exists in pure positivity, simply being what it is without question or gap. But human consciousness opens a hole in this being, a space where negation becomes possible. Through consciousness, things can be absent as well as present. We can think about what is not here, imagine what does not exist, negate what is, and project what might be. We are the beings through whom nothingness enters the world. This nothingness manifests in every aspect of human existence. It appears in our freedom, which is the capacity to separate ourselves from our past and our situation, to be not determined by what has been. It shows up in our desires, which are oriented toward what we lack rather than what we possess. It emerges in our questions, which introduce the possibility of absence, the recognition that an answer might not exist. It structures our relations with others, creating the gap between consciousnesses that can never be fully bridged. The recognition that we are nothingness can be disturbing. It suggests we have no fixed nature, no essential core, no substantial self that would anchor our identity. We are not things but absences, not beings but the gaps through which being appears and is negated. We lack the solidity and permanence we attribute to objects. We are perpetually incomplete, perpetually at a distance from ourselves, perpetually projecting toward a future that does not yet exist. Yet this nothingness is also the source of our freedom. Because we are not fixed things, we are free to be otherwise than we are. Because we introduce negation into the world, we can imagine alternatives to what exists. Because we are gaps rather than substances, we are not determined by our past or our nature. The nothingness that makes us unstable and incomplete is the same nothingness that makes us free. Sartre wrote Being and Nothingness during the German occupation of Paris, and perhaps the historical moment shaped his vision. In a time when human freedom seemed most constrained, when the weight of external forces pressed down with terrible force, he articulated a philosophy in which freedom emerges from nothingness itself, from the gap that consciousness introduces into being. Even when we cannot change our circumstances, we remain the nothingness that separates itself from those circumstances, that judges them, that refuses to coincide with them. The relationship between being and nothingness is not one of opposition, but of mutual dependence. Nothingness needs being to negate. Consciousness needs objects to be conscious of. Human reality exists precisely in this relationship, as the nothingness that introduces negation into being, as the gap through which being becomes present and is transcended toward possibility. We are neither pure being nor pure nothingness, but the unstable synthesis of both, the beings who exist as the opening through which being questions itself. Temporality and the three dimensions of time. There is a strange asymmetry in how we exist across time. The past is fixed, unchangeable, a weight of accumulated facts that we carry with us. The future is open, indeterminate, a field of possibilities that have not yet been realized. And the present seems to slip away even as we try to grasp it, constantly dissolving into past while new moments emerge from the future. Yet we are somehow all three at once, existing simultaneously as what we have been, what we are, and what we will become. Sartre recognized that human temporality is fundamentally different from the time of objects. A stone exists simply in the present moment. It has a history, certainly, a past that shaped its current form, but the stone does not carry this past as a burden or a resource. It does not project itself toward a future. It simply is what it is in each successive moment, indifferent to the passage of time. Human consciousness, by contrast, is stretched across time, existing in all three dimensions simultaneously, in a way that creates both our freedom and our incompleteness. Consider how the past functions for consciousness. Your past is fixed in its facticity. What you have done cannot be undone. The choices you made, the actions you took, the person you were, these are now unchangeable facts. Yet this past does not determine your present or your future in the way that physical causes determine physical effects. The past exists for you as something you must interpret, something you take up and give meaning to through your current projects. The same event in your past can have radically different meanings depending on how you choose to relate to it now. A failure from years ago might be interpreted as proof of your inadequacy, as a learning experience that made you stronger, or as an irrelevant accident that has no bearing on who you are today. The facticity of the event remains constant, but its meaning shifts according to how your present consciousness takes it up. You are your past in the sense that you cannot deny or escape what you have been. But you are not your past in the sense that you remain free to determine what this past means for who you are becoming. The future exists in a completely different mode. It is not actual but possible, not given but projected. Yet you exist as fundamentally oriented toward the future, always ahead of yourself, always projecting toward possibilities that do not yet exist. Every action you take is undertaken for the sake of something that has not yet been realized. You study now for an exam that will happen later. You work today for a life you hope to have tomorrow. You speak words in this moment, hoping to create an effect in the next moment. This projection toward the future is not optional. It is the structure of consciousness itself. You cannot simply be in the present without transcending it toward future possibilities. Even the person who claims to live entirely in the now is projecting a future in which this present-focused way of living will continue or produce certain results. To be conscious is to be always already beyond the present moment, always reaching toward what is not yet, always incomplete because the future toward which you project remains unrealized. And what of the present? It seems to be the point where past and future meet, the moment of actual existence, yet the present proves strangely elusive when we try to grasp it. The moment you become aware of the present, it has already slipped into the past. The present seems to have no duration, no thickness. It is the knife edge between what has been and what will be, so thin that it barely exists at all. Sartre suggests that the present is the presence of consciousness to being. It is the moment of encounter between consciousness and the world, the instant in which things appear and are taken up by consciousness. But this present is never pure presence because consciousness is always already transcending it. You cannot be simply present because you are always bringing your past with you and projecting yourself toward the future. The present exists as the point of tension between the weight of facticity and the pull of possibility. This three-dimensional structure of temporality reveals something essential about human incompleteness. You are never fully present to yourself because you are dispersed across time. Part of you is fixed in the unchangeable past. Part of you is projected toward the unrealized future, and the present moment that might unify these dimensions is so thin, so fleeting, that it offers no stable ground for self-identity. You exist as a process stretched across time, rather than as a thing that is simply present in time. This temporal structure is intimately connected to freedom, Because the past does not determine the future with necessity. Because the meaning of the past shifts according to present projects. Because the future remains open and undetermined, you are free to become other than you have been. The weight of the past provides resistance, creates a situation within which freedom must operate. But it does not eliminate the fundamental openness of human existence toward possibilities that have not yet been realized. Yet this freedom comes at the cost of permanence and stability. You cannot achieve a fixed identity because you are always already moving beyond whatever you are toward what you might become. The past that defines what you have been is constantly being reinterpreted by a present that is itself vanishing toward the future. And the future that promises completion always recedes as you move toward it, never arriving as the permanent present you hoped it would be. The body as the instrument of consciousness. There is a peculiar intimacy between consciousness and the body that we rarely pause to examine. We are not minds imprisoned in flesh, observing the physical world from some interior vantage point, nor are we simply bodies, mechanisms that respond automatically to stimuli. We exist as embodied consciousness, as beings whose very way of engaging with reality is mediated through the body, yet whose consciousness cannot be reduced to mere physicality. Sartre saw the body as existing in three distinct dimensions, each revealing a different aspect of how we are embodied. First, there is the body as we live it, the body for itself. This is not the body we observe, but the body we are, the transparent medium through which we engage with the world. When you reach for a cup, you do not observe your hand moving through space and then calculate how to grasp the object. Your body simply extends toward what you desire. The hand is not an object you manipulate, but the very means by which you manipulate objects. Think about how different this lived body is from the body you might observe in a mirror. When you act in the world, your body disappears into its function. The skilled pianist does not think about fingers pressing keys. The athlete does not observe their body executing movements. The body becomes transparent, a pure capacity for engaging with things, an instrument so perfectly integrated with consciousness that it ceases to be noticed as separate. You do not have a body in the way you have a possession. You are your body in the mode of living through it. But there is also the body for others, the body as it appears when someone else looks at you. This is the body that has height and weight, that occupies space, that can be described and judged according to observable characteristics. This body exists for the other's perception in a way it can never exist for your own direct experience. You can see parts of your body, certainly, but you can never perceive it from outside the way others perceive it. You cannot know what it is like to encounter yourself as an object in space. The look of the other gives you access to this dimension of your body. When you become aware of being watched, you suddenly experience your body as it might appear to the observer. You become self-conscious about your posture, your expression, your movements. The body that was transparent a moment ago becomes present as an object that is being evaluated and judged. And in this transformation, you discover that you exist for others in a bodily way that exceeds your control and your direct knowledge. Then there exists a third dimension, what Sartre calls the body for itself as known by the other. This is the awareness we have of how others perceive our body, the incorporation of their gaze into our own self-consciousness. You develop a sense of yourself as tall or short, attractive or plain, graceful or awkward, based on how others have responded to your physical presence. This internalized perception shapes how you move through the world, how you present yourself, what possibilities seem available or closed to you based on your embodiment. The body is also the locus of our facticity, the given conditions we cannot choose or change through will alone. You did not select your body. You did not choose its capabilities or limitations, its appearance or its vulnerabilities. You are born into a particular body that then becomes the situation within which your freedom must operate. The person with a disability does not have the same concrete possibilities as someone without that disability, not because their consciousness is different, but because their embodiment creates a different situation. Yet even this unchosen body does not determine the meaning of our existence. How we take up our embodiment, what we make of its capabilities and limitations, what projects we pursue through it, these remain matters of freedom. Two people with identical bodies might relate to their embodiment in completely different ways. One might experience certain physical characteristics as limitations, while another sees opportunities. The facticity of the body provides the terrain, but consciousness determines how to navigate it. Sartre insists that we are neither pure consciousness nor pure body, but the unity of both in a way that cannot be separated. Consciousness is always embodied, always engaged with the world through the body, and the body is always lived by consciousness, always more than mere flesh, because it is taken up and given meaning through the projects of consciousness. We exist as this strange synthesis, neither reducible to mind nor to matter, but something that emerges in the union of consciousness and flesh. This embodiment shapes every aspect of our existence. Our desires are bodily. Our engagement with the world is through bodily action. Our vulnerability to others comes partly through our embodiment, through the fact that we can be seen, touched, affected physically. Our temporality is lived through a body that ages, that carries the marks of time, that moves inexorably toward death. We are thrown into existence not as pure consciousness, but as consciousness that is somewhere, in a body, in a place, in a situation. The body remains the strange instrument through which consciousness engages with being, neither fully subject nor fully object, neither fully chosen nor fully given, the facticity that enables and limits our transcendence. Existential psychoanalysis. There is a method for understanding human beings that differs fundamentally from traditional psychoanalysis, where Freud sought hidden drives and unconscious mechanisms, where conventional psychology looks for causal explanations and determining factors. Sartre proposes something stranger and more elusive. He calls it existential psychoanalysis, and it aims not to explain why we must be what we are, but to reveal the original choice through which we have made ourselves what we are. This method begins with a different assumption about human nature. Traditional psychoanalysis presupposes that our conscious behaviors are surface manifestations of deeper unconscious forces. We act as we do because of repressed desires, childhood traumas, instinctual drives that operate beneath awareness. The analyst's task is to uncover these hidden causes, to make the unconscious conscious, to explain the present through the buried past. But Sartre rejects the idea of an unconscious that operates as a separate realm of determining forces. For him, consciousness is transparent to itself. We may deceive ourselves about what we are doing, may refuse to acknowledge the choices we are making, may organize our awareness in ways that allow us to avoid recognizing our freedom. But this is bad faith, not unconsciousness. It is a lie we tell ourselves while knowing at some level that we are lying. There is no hidden region of the psyche that operates according to mechanical laws independent of our freedom. If this is true, then the task of existential psychoanalysis becomes different. Instead of uncovering unconscious causes, it seeks to reveal the fundamental project that unifies all our choices and behaviors. Every action we take, every desire we express, every value we hold flows from an original choice about how we will relate to existence. This choice is not a single decision made at one moment, but a continuous orientation that shapes everything we do, though we rarely become explicitly conscious of it. Think about how this method would approach a particular person. Rather than asking what childhood experiences caused them to be as they are, existential psychoanalysis would examine the pattern of their choices to discover the underlying project. What do their actions reveal about how they have chosen to take up existence? What fundamental stance toward being is expressed through the specific details of their life? What are they trying to achieve through the particular ways they engage with the world and with others? Sartre illustrates this through analyses of specific individuals. When examining someone's relationship to possessions, for instance, existential psychoanalysis does not ask what unconscious needs these possessions satisfy. It asks what project of being is expressed through the desire to possess. Is the person trying to extend themselves into the world by making things theirs? Are they attempting to achieve permanence by accumulating what will outlast them? Are they seeking to fill an internal lack through external abundance? Every surface behavior becomes a symbol of something deeper, but not deeper in the sense of being hidden in the unconscious. Deeper in the sense of being more fundamental, more revealing of the original choice through which the person has organized their entire existence. The way someone relates to their body, their characteristic emotions, their choices in relationships, their attitude toward work, all of these express the same fundamental project in different forms. This project is not determined by external causes or internal mechanisms. It is chosen, though not through conscious deliberation. It emerges from the encounter between consciousness and the world, from the necessity of taking some stance toward existence. And because it is chosen, it can be changed. But changing it requires not just modifying surface behaviors or gaining insight into unconscious motives. It requires what Sartre calls radical conversion, a fundamental reorientation of one's entire way of being. Existential psychoanalysis also differs in its goals. Traditional therapy aims to cure neurosis, to restore normal functioning, to eliminate symptoms that interfere with adaptation to social life. But existential psychoanalysis has no interest in normalization. It seeks only to reveal the fundamental project, to make explicit what has been implicit, to bring to full consciousness the choice through which we have made ourselves what we are. Whether we then choose to change this project or to own it more fully is left to our freedom. This method requires a different kind of attention. The analyst must look not for causes but for meanings, not for determining factors, but for expressions of freedom. They must read every detail of a life as a symbolic expression of the fundamental project, must trace surface behaviors back to their root in the original choice. This is not mechanical interpretation according to predetermined categories, but a careful attention to the unique way each person has chosen to exist. Perhaps what is most radical about existential psychoanalysis is its refusal to explain away freedom. It does not reduce our choices to the effects of causes beyond our control. It does not claim that we must be what we are because of forces operating in the unconscious. Instead, it reveals that we are what we have chosen to be, even when we did not realize we were choosing, even when we constructed elaborate defenses to avoid recognizing our choice. The fundamental project remains largely invisible until existential psychoanalysis brings it to light, revealing the pattern that connects all our scattered behaviors into a unified way of taking up existence. Sartre and Camus, the friendship that shattered. There is a particular sadness that accompanies the breaking of a philosophical friendship, when two minds that once sparked against each other in productive tension suddenly find the gap between them unbridgeable. For years, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus walked together through the intellectual landscape of post-war France, two figures who seemed to represent variations on similar themes. Both explored the absurdity of existence, both wrestled with questions of freedom and responsibility, both tried to articulate what it meant to live honestly in a world without inherent meaning. Yet beneath the surface similarities, fundamental differences were growing, differences that would eventually tear their friendship apart. The rupture came publicly in 1952, though its roots reached back further. Camus had published a work called The Rebel, examining the nature of rebellion and revolution, questioning whether political violence could ever be justified even in service of noble aims. Sartre's associate wrote a harsh review in their journal, and when Camus responded with an open letter, Sartre himself replied with devastating coldness. The exchange was not merely intellectual disagreement, but personal betrayal, each man feeling that the other had fundamentally misunderstood not just his philosophy but his character. At the heart of their split lay different responses to the same recognition of absurdity. Both men acknowledged that existence has no inherent meaning, that we are thrown into a world that offers no cosmic justification for being. But where Sartre pushed toward radical freedom and political engagement, Camus pulled back toward limits and moderation. Where Sartre embraced the necessity of choosing sides in historical struggles, Camus worried about the violence that such commitments seemed to require. Where Sartre insisted on absolute responsibility, Camus sought a Mediterranean balance, a middle way between extremes. The political dimension of their disagreement centered on communism and revolution. Sartre, though never a party member, defended aspects of Soviet communism during the early Cold War, arguing that intellectuals in capitalist countries should not join in condemning a system that at least aimed at justice, however imperfectly. Camus, who had experienced totalitarianism more directly through his work in the French Resistance, could not accept this accommodation. He saw in communist ideology the same impulse toward total control that had animated fascism, a willingness to sacrifice present human beings for abstract future goals. But beneath the political disagreement lay something deeper. Sartre believed in the possibility of historical progress, in the idea that human action could reshape society toward greater freedom and justice. This required taking sides, making commitments, accepting that one might have to use questionable means for worthy ends. Camus doubted this historical optimism. He saw in revolutionary movements a tendency toward absolutism, a willingness to eliminate ambiguity and impose perfect solutions that inevitably resulted in new forms of oppression. Their split revealed a tension within existential thought itself. If existence precedes essence, if we create our values through our choices, then what prevents us from choosing monstrosity? Sartre insisted on engagement, on choosing sides, and accepting responsibility for these choices, even when they involved moral compromise. Camus insisted on limits, on certain values that should not be sacrificed even for political goals, on maintaining what he called measure in the face of absurdity. The personal dimension of their break was perhaps more painful than the philosophical one. They had been friends, had supported each other's work, had spent countless hours in conversation. Sartre had championed Camus' early writing. Camus had looked to Sartre as a philosophical ally. But once the rupture occurred, it proved permanent. They never reconciled. When Camus died in a car accident in 1960, Sartre wrote a tribute acknowledging their estrangement with regret, but the gap remained unclosed. What makes this rupture significant beyond personal drama is what it reveals about the difficulty of living existential philosophy in concrete situations. Both men were trying to be authentic, to live according to their understanding of human freedom, yet they arrived at incompatible positions. Both were committed to opposing oppression, yet they disagreed about which struggles deserved support and which methods could be justified. Both recognized the weight of individual responsibility, yet they distributed this weight differently across the terrain of political choice. Perhaps there was something inevitable about their split. Sartre's philosophy pushed toward absolute freedom and radical responsibility, toward the necessity of choosing without guarantee or foundation. This could justify engagement with imperfect movements if the alternative was passivity. Camus' sensibility, shaped by his experience of political violence and totalitarian ideology, pulled toward caution and limits, toward recognition that some evils cannot be justified by any end. The friendship that shattered left both men diminished. They had lost not just companionship but a productive tension, a challenge that forced each to sharpen his thinking against the resistance of the other. And perhaps what their rupture suggests is that existential philosophy, for all its emphasis on freedom and choice, offers no clear guidance for navigating the moral complexities of political life. Two thoughtful men, both committed to honesty and freedom, could look at the same historical moment and draw opposite conclusions about how to act. The ethics of ambiguity. There is a question that haunts existential philosophy from its inception. If there is no God, no cosmic order, no predetermined human nature, then on what basis can we claim that any action is better than any other? If we create our values through our choices rather than discovering them in the structure of reality, what prevents us from choosing monstrous values? If existence precedes essence, what grounds morality? This question troubled many who encountered Sartre's philosophy. Critics accused existentialism of leading inevitably to moral relativism or nihilism. If everything is permitted, If we are radically free to choose our values without external foundation, then what prevents anyone from choosing cruelty, tyranny, or violence? Sartre wrestled with this problem throughout his work, but perhaps the most sustained attempt to develop an existential ethics came not from him but from his lifelong companion, Simone de Beauvoir, in her work examining the ethics of ambiguity. The starting point for an existential ethics must be the recognition that we are condemned to be free. This freedom is not a value we choose, but the structure of our existence. We cannot refuse it or escape it. And because we are free, we are responsible for what we make of ourselves and what we make of the world through our actions. But this freedom exists in fundamental ambiguity. We are both subject and object, both freedom and facticity, both transcendence and situation. We are always more and less than what we claim to be. The ethics of ambiguity begins by acknowledging this fundamental condition rather than fleeing from it. We cannot ground morality in divine commands because there is no divine commander. We cannot base it on natural law because human beings have no fixed nature. We cannot derive it from reason alone because reason cannot tell us what goals we should pursue, only how to pursue whatever goals we choose. We are left with the disturbing recognition that we must create our values without any foundation outside our own freedom. Yet this does not mean all choices are equal. The ethics of ambiguity distinguishes between ways of exercising freedom that acknowledge freedom and ways that deny it. The person who lives in bad faith, who pretends to be determined by their nature or their circumstances, who claims they had no choice when they did have choice, is living inauthentically. They are denying the freedom that constitutes their being. And because freedom is the fundamental value that makes all other values possible, denying freedom is a kind of fundamental wrong. But this quickly becomes more complex. We are not isolated individuals freely choosing in a vacuum. We exist in a world with others who are also free, and our freedom is intertwined with theirs in ways we cannot escape. When I act, I affect the situation within which others must exercise their freedom. I can create conditions that expand or contract their possibilities. And because I value my own freedom, because I recognize it as the source of all value, I must also value the freedom of others. This leads to something like a basic moral principle. We should act in ways that respect and expand freedom, both our own and others. We should oppose oppression not because some abstract rule tells us to, but because oppression is the denial of freedom, the attempt to reduce free beings to things. We should seek justice not because it is written in the cosmic order, but because injustice restricts the possibilities available to those who suffer from it. Yet the ethics of ambiguity recognizes that moral life is never simple. We often face situations where every option involves some wrong, where expanding one person's freedom requires limiting another's, where we must choose between conflicting goods with no clear guidance about which to prioritize. There is no formula that would resolve these dilemmas in advance. We must choose and we must accept responsibility for our choices, knowing that we might be wrong and that others might judge us harshly. This acceptance of moral ambiguity is not an excuse for inaction or indifference. It is a recognition that moral life requires courage, requires making commitments despite uncertainty, requires accepting responsibility even when we cannot be certain we have chosen correctly. The person who waits for absolute moral certainty before acting is using this demand for certainty as an excuse to avoid the burden of choice. The ethics of ambiguity also recognizes different ways that people relate to their freedom. Some live as though they were not free, fleeing from responsibility into various forms of self-deception. Others acknowledge their freedom, but use it in service of denying freedom to others, becoming oppressors who treat other people as objects to be manipulated or controlled. Still others recognize freedom in themselves and in others, working to expand the possibilities available to all. Perhaps what is most challenging about existential ethics is its refusal to provide comfort or security. It offers no list of rules to follow, no authority to appeal to when choices become difficult, no guarantee that we are doing the right thing. It demands that we choose anyway, that we accept responsibility for these choices, that we live with the ambiguity and uncertainty that characterize moral existence, and it suggests that authenticity requires acknowledging this ambiguity rather than fleeing from it into false certainties. The ethics of ambiguity does not resolve the question of how to live. It suggests instead that this question has no final answer, that we must continually choose how to be in each new situation, that we carry the weight of this choosing without refuge or escape. Political engagement and freedom. There is a tension that runs through the heart of existential philosophy when it turns toward politics. If we are radically free, if each individual creates their own values without external foundation, how can we justify collective action? If existence precedes essence, if there is no human nature that determines what we should be, on what basis can we claim that certain social arrangements are preferable to others? Yet Sartre insisted that existentialism is a humanism, that recognition of our freedom demands engagement with the world rather than retreat into isolated individualism. The political dimension of Sartre's thought evolved throughout his life, but certain themes remained constant. He believed that freedom is not merely an individual possession, but something that exists only in concrete situations shaped by social and historical forces. You are free, but your freedom is exercised within circumstances you did not create, circumstances that can expand or contract the possibilities available to you. And because these circumstances are created by human action, they can be changed through human action. Consider what it means to be free in a society structured by oppression. The worker is free in the existential sense. They remain consciousness. They must choose how to respond to their situation. They cannot claim that their circumstances eliminate their responsibility. But their concrete freedom, the actual possibilities available to them, is severely limited by economic structures that place them in positions of powerlessness. They can choose to resist or to accept their situation, but they cannot simply will themselves into different material conditions. This recognition led Sartre toward political engagement. If we value freedom, if we recognize it as the source of all value, then we must oppose structures that restrict freedom. We must work to expand the concrete possibilities available to all people, not just to protect our own isolated liberty. Freedom is not something we can possess alone while others remain oppressed. Our freedom is bound up with the freedom of others in ways that demand we take responsibility for the social conditions we collectively create. But political engagement raises difficult questions. How do we choose which struggles to support? How do we navigate situations where different groups' freedoms seem to conflict? How do we judge when violence or coercion might be justified in service of liberation? Sartre grappled with these questions throughout his life, sometimes supporting movements whose methods seemed to contradict the values they claimed to pursue. His support for various revolutionary movements, particularly in the developing world, stemmed from his belief that oppressed peoples had the right to liberate themselves by any means necessary. He argued that intellectuals in colonizing nations should not presume to judge the methods used by those fighting for independence, that the violence of the oppressed was fundamentally different from the violence of oppressors. This position led to fierce debates and cost him friendships, yet he maintained that authentic engagement required taking sides rather than maintaining a false neutrality. The question of political commitment reveals a deeper problem in existential philosophy. If we are absolutely free, if we create our values through our choices, then political commitment seems arbitrary. We choose to support this cause rather than that one, but this choice has no foundation beyond our freedom. Yet Sartre insisted that certain commitments follow from the recognition of freedom itself. If we acknowledge our own freedom as valuable, we must acknowledge the freedom of all human beings as valuable. And if we acknowledge this universal value, we must oppose conditions that restrict freedom and work toward conditions that expand it. This leads to a paradox. We must commit to political action without any guarantee that our commitments are correct. We must take sides in historical struggles without access to absolute knowledge about which side serves freedom. We must accept that our choices might be wrong, that we might later recognize errors in our judgments, yet we must choose anyway, because refusing to choose is itself a choice that allows existing oppression to continue. Sartre believed that authenticity requires engagement with the historical moment we inhabit. We cannot retreat into private life while social structures continue to restrict the freedom of others. We cannot claim to value freedom while remaining indifferent to the concrete conditions that make freedom possible or impossible. But engagement does not mean blind adherence to any party or ideology. It means continually examining the consequences of our choices, remaining willing to revise our commitments when they prove to contradict freedom, accepting responsibility for both our actions and our inactions. Perhaps what is most challenging about Sartre's political vision is its refusal to provide comfort or certainty. He offers no formula for determining the right political position, no method that would guarantee we are serving freedom rather than inadvertently restricting it. He demands that we engage with the messy reality of political life, that we make commitments despite uncertainty, that we accept the weight of responsibility for shaping the social conditions within which all of us exercise our freedom. Political engagement becomes not a departure from existential philosophy, but its necessary consequence, the recognition that individual freedom exists only within social contexts that we must take responsibility for creating and transforming. The legacy of existential dread. There is a philosophical voice that still echoes through the decades, a voice that spoke uncomfortable truths about human freedom and refused to offer easy consolation. Jean-Paul Sartre died in 1980, yet his vision of human existence continues to disturb and provoke, to challenge our comfortable assumptions about who we are and what we can become. His funeral drew tens of thousands of people through the streets of Paris, a testament to how deeply his ideas had penetrated the consciousness of his time. But what remains of his philosophy now in an age so different from the one he inhabited? The existential dread that Sartre articulated has not disappeared. If anything, it has become more pervasive, more difficult to ignore. We live in a time of overwhelming possibility and paralyzing choice, where traditional structures of meaning have weakened, but nothing stable has emerged to replace them. We are more aware than ever of our freedom, yet more anxious about how to exercise it. We have more options than any previous generation, yet feel more lost in trying to determine which options to pursue. Sartre's insistence that existence precedes essence speaks to our contemporary condition with renewed force. We are no longer bound by rigid social roles or predetermined life paths. We can choose careers, relationships, identities, ways of being that previous generations could not have imagined. Yet this expansion of possibility brings with it the weight of responsibility that Sartre diagnosed. We cannot blame our circumstances or our nature for who we become. We are condemned to choose, and this condemnation feels heavier when the range of choice expands beyond what we can easily navigate. The concept of bad faith remains disturbingly relevant. We continue to find elaborate ways to avoid recognizing our freedom, to pretend we are less responsible than we are. We claim that algorithms determine what we see and therefore what we think. We insist that our psychology, or our trauma, or our identity leaves us no choice but to act as we do. We organize our lives around the approval of others while pretending we are simply being ourselves. The mechanisms of self-deception have evolved, but the underlying pattern Sartre identified persists. His analysis of human relationships also retains its disturbing power. We still seek recognition from others while resisting their objectifying gaze. We still pursue love as an impossible project of possession. We still struggle with the fundamental tension between wanting to be seen and fearing to be seen, between needing others and resenting our dependence on them. Social media has intensified these dynamics, creating new arenas where the look of the other shapes our sense of ourselves, where we perform identity for audiences we cannot control. Perhaps what makes Sartre's philosophy endure is not that it offers solutions, but that it refuses to look away from problems that have no solution. He insisted on examining human existence in its full complexity and contradiction, without retreating into comforting illusions. He acknowledged that we are caught between incompatible desires, that we seek what we cannot achieve, that we are fundamentally incomplete beings who cannot resolve our incompleteness through any accumulation of accomplishments or possessions. This refusal of consolation can seem harsh, even cruel. Why articulate a philosophy that offers no comfort, that insists we are alone with our freedom, that denies us the refuge of necessity or fate? But perhaps the value of Sartre's work lies precisely in this uncompromising honesty. He treats us as adults who can bear the truth about our condition rather than children who need to be protected from reality through pleasant fictions. The legacy of existential dread is not despair but responsibility. If we are free, if we are creating ourselves through our choices, if no external authority can tell us what to be, then we must take full ownership of what we make of ourselves and what we make of the world through our actions. This is terrifying, but it is also dignifying. We are not mechanisms responding to inputs, not products of forces beyond our control, not following scripts written before we were born. We are beings who author our own existence, and this authorship carries both the burden and the possibility of freedom. Sartre's influence extends beyond professional philosophy into literature, psychology, political thought, and popular culture. His ideas permeate contemporary consciousness, even when people have never read his work, even when they have never heard his name. The questions he raised about authenticity, freedom, responsibility, and the meaning of existence continue to haunt anyone who pauses to reflect on what it means to be human in a world without inherent meaning. As we drift toward sleep with these thoughts, perhaps we can acknowledge both the terror and the dignity of the existential condition. We are free, and this freedom is both our burden and our possibility. We are responsible, and this responsibility is both crushing and empowering. We are incomplete, and this incompleteness is both our suffering and the source of our capacity for change. The existential dread remains, but so does the human capacity to face it honestly and to create meaning, despite the absence of any cosmic guarantee that our meanings matter. The legacy endures in every moment we recognize our freedom and accept the weight of what this recognition demands. Thank you for wandering with me through these questions tonight. If these reflections stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm always curious about your perspective. You'll find more journeys waiting on this channel, stories meant to keep you company in the quiet hours. If you'd like to walk further with us, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, may your thoughts carry you gently into rest.